Okay, I'm ready to unleash a whole series of new questions. Are you prepared?
Okay, go ahead, bring it. I'll do what I can. Yeah,
Okay.
go.
With regard to the myths associated with the story and that sort of thing, there are more than a few pieces online that indicate that some other strange things were happening in the house, like ghost, like poltergeist type activity. Is that true?
Yeah, but there's a big but there. It had nothing to do with the ball. That was
Okay.
something about the house
That was my
that
next
happened.
question.
Yeah, that was the house. And there was a lot of weird stuff. When we first got out there to the island, the house had been broken into for years and years because no one had lived there. The family had built it for one of their daughters, and I think I'm not sure if she committed suicide or what had happened, but she never got in the house. The girl that the house was built for, her photograph was at the house, and some of her things were there at the house, so she had never lived there. And there was a picture of her that was this beautiful 1920s kind of flapper girl picture, but it was just a bust picture of her head and her shoulders. And it was painted on wood in this really ornate frame. And the frame and the picture and all were all one piece. And then her photograph was painted on it. While the family was gone one weekend, we came back and there was a little chair that was sitting beneath it that had been given to the family by someone who was a friend of the Neffs. That chair was smashed to bits, and the face of the picture was burned. It was almost like someone had held it over a candle and just burned her face out.
Wait, what?
And it was charred and cracked and burned and completely, but still hanging on the wall. Nothing had been broken into. And the house used to get broken into a lot, but by this point it had been secured. There was an alarm system on the house. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. No windows were broken. There was no sign of forced entry into the house. Granted, maybe somebody got in with the key and they did it, but why break that chair and burn her face out of the picture? So Jerry kept the picture for a while, and it's been lost to time because you don't hang something like that up anymore. But they held it over a candle and just burned her whole face off. And you could still see like her hair and the hat that she was wearing and her shoulders, but her features, you could no longer see her face. The paint had even cracked, like it had caught on fire and cracked. That was one of the weird things. And then we'd hear an organ in the house. When we first got there, the house didn't have electricity for a while because people had pulled lights out of the wall, these beautiful old ship lights that were in the house. They'd ripped them out of the wall. And so there were so many that we didn't even know where the lights were. We were scared to flip on a fuse box for fear that we'd catch on fire.
People were like stealing it to use somewhere else, like salvage
Oh,
stuff.
just to
Yeah.
steal. Yeah, there were times when the family first moved there in 1969, I think it was. We lived in the city, and we would come out to the house to work on the house and clean it up, and all the kids got involved and had their chores and clean. And we'd go back to the city. We'd come back the next weekend, and windows would be broken, house would be destroyed, stuff would be torn up. Didn't matter if there was already a broken window. They wanted to break their own window. And then it got to where Jerry would go to the house with the kids on the weekend, head out there on Friday afternoon, leave the car somewhere else, and walk through the woods to the house, so no one would know we were there. And we'd sit there and have our normal family stuff, no electricity on, of course. And all of a sudden you hear a car coming, and she'd say, "Hey, be quiet, there's a car coming." And she'd get the shotgun and she'd cock it, and we'd sit and wait for him to break in. And you hear him break in, and she'd walk down the stairs and she'd aim the shotgun at him and tell him to take a seat. She'd get on the phone, call the police. It would take them an hour to get out because they're coming from town. Police would come, they'd take them. By the time the police got back to town with that group of kids, she's calling again, going, "I got another one for you." There were times that a skating bus, remember those skating buses that would take all the kids skating on Friday?
Yeah, sure,
school?
sure.
A skating bus pulled up at the house with like 18 kids on it. They get out and they all start breaking windows. So she's like, "Really? Are you kidding me?" We'd have to call a tow truck to come tow the cars away that belonged to people that broke in. And one day the tow truck driver comes out to tow a car away, and he's like, "Crap, this is my son's car." His son had broken into our house.
God.
So it was crazy, but we had no electricity at this time because of the fact that we were still trying to get through the wiring, and it was every weekend people doing this stuff. So one day we're sitting in the library of the house. We've finally gotten power on to that part of the house, and all of a sudden the television is on, and the police officer's son-in-law is there, and the whole family sitting watching TV. This is like the first week we've had power, so we're all excited about this. All of a sudden, this organ music starts playing, like a church organ, and it starts getting louder and louder and louder, and we're like, "What the heck is that?" So the police officer gets up, goes up to see if it's one of the kids playing music somewhere. Well, we're all accounted for. We're all sitting here watching TV. It's not us. The older kids haven't gotten home. It's not them. But when you leave the house and walk outside, you don't hear it. It's only in the house. We don't have an organ. So he looks everywhere. It just gets louder and louder and louder, and then it just stops. This happens so many times. And we thought, well, are we hearing it from, it's coming across the water, from the marsh? We really tried to think it through. Where is this coming from? But it's only within the house. There was another time when, while everyone is sitting there, it sounded like a giant barrel came rolling down the staircase of the house and hit the doors so hard that the doors flew open back in the same direction the barrel had come from. I mean, the jolt was just that hard. It flung the doors open. You'd hear people walking through the house. There was stuff all the time. You'd hear people laughing in the house when there would be nobody. And we would always think, well, is it stuff that's carrying and we're just picking it up because we're on this hill? Who has mountains in Florida? Here it is, this big mountain area in Florida. And maybe it's just a weird place and we're picking it up, but you only would hear it in the house. You wouldn't ever hear it outside. And it would happen time and time and time again. And this was long before the ball. So I think that was just the house, or, maybe it's just the people involved. I don't know.
The organ music, you guys were hearing that before the electricity or after, or both?
Both. We would hear it, but the night that the police officer was there, and the reason that this really stands out is because he got so upset. He goes, you know what? He goes, this isn't funny. I don't know if y'all were playing a joke, but this is not funny. He goes, I go out and I face some of the biggest, meanest human beings on the planet in my job, but I don't like it when I can't see it.
And this is a family member. This is one of the family.
This is a family member. Yeah, and there were two women that had worked with Jerry. Their husbands were truck drivers, and they took care of the kids when the kids were young. And they had been with her from long before she moved to the island, and it was two sisters. And they would stay and take care of the kids. And they actually packed up and left, and they said, we're not coming back. This is just freaking us out. We can't do this. Because the music would get so loud. It would, things would vibrate. It would get so loud in the house. It was just crazy.
And to be clear, this is before the ball showed up or was discovered.
Yes. Yep, long before. This is 5-6 years before.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, as you'll read in the stories, connect the organ music, which is often reported, but connect that to having to do something with the ball. So the family's feeling, though, was there any connection at all? Like maybe the ball
did it even overlap?
Interact? Yeah.
Did you hear the organ while the ball was there, or they just didn't even overlap?
They didn't really even overlap.
Okay.
Yeah. And after a while, the organ music stopped. It went on for a few years, and then it stopped, and we were never able to explain it. We had a piano, but we never had an organ. And like I said, originally, when we didn't even have electricity in the house, there's no way that this is coming from our house. And you're secluded out in the middle of nowhere. If you look at an aerial view of where that house is, there's nothing around.
We did. Yeah. We actually were doing that yesterday.
Yeah. So it's, and there's a lot of weird stuff on that island. I mean, there's some really cool stuff on the island, some history and some, call it what you want, paranormal or whatever things that went on there. And I'm one of those people that I'm very skeptical about things. And I know I'm talking very freely as if, everyone has paranormal experiences. But that comes from me trying to look at every possible excuse for what it can be and not coming up with anything that makes any sense at all. And I'll even go for something far-fetched if it'll help explain it, but nothing. There is no way to explain some of the things that we saw and experienced there. So I've just gotten to the point that it's one of the things I can't explain, and I know that it happened. And I don't need to convince anybody, but I finally come to the conclusion myself that I'll never fully understand it, but it's something that to this point has never been logically explained to me in any other way than that it's something possibly supernatural.
Was there any strange activity, paranormal or otherwise, while the ball was in the house, or was all just the strangeness coming just from the ball itself?
Just from the ball itself. Our animals even reacted to it. Yeah. They would come in when it wasn't even making sounds. There were times we had a little poodle named Huckleberry, and she would cover her ears, and it just hurt her. It was like she would whimper and whine and rub her ears like they hurt. She didn't like to come in when it was around. And especially if it had been played with, when you mess with it and it would get that kind
agitated
of magnetic thing going, the dogs wouldn't even come in. They wouldn't even come in the room. So it must have been putting out something that they could detect.
Often in the articles you read, there's a discussion that the family was wondering or had maybe an intuition of that the ball was either controlling itself or was being controlled by some external force. Do you have any ideas about that or thoughts about that or just intuition of?
That's a good question. I hadn't seen that. I never got that feeling that it was being controlled by an external source, but I got the feeling that it was doing stuff on its own. So I guess, I'm probably backtracking here. I guess maybe that does have to insinuate that there's an external source maneuvering it, but I never really thought about it.
Okay.
To put it in those terms, I never really thought about it that way, but it was doing something. And whether or not it was communicating or trying to communicate with someone, it was definitely doing something on its own. I mean, it had something was moving within it, and it was putting out sounds, and it was reacting, and it was doing weird stuff that makes no sense. Why would you make a device that can go back to the person that rolls it? What is that good for?
An awesome toy.
I mean, unless you can bring me a beer and a remote control, then, I don't really need you. So it's just stuff like that.
Was it never right again after Terry recovered it? It was done doing tricks at that point, essentially?
It would still do the magnetic stuff,
Uh-huh.
but it wouldn't roll on its own. It was just completely different. It sounded differently. It sounded like when it rolled, it almost sounds like shards of metal rolling across. You could hear them. It was like they were in contact with the sides at all time now. They weren't floating around and pinging. It was just like crap rolling inside a metal dish is what it sounded like. Like they had obliterated it.
Did the family have any kind of long-lasting, any sort of strange medical effects or side effects from being around it?
Other than us just being weird? No. No, I never noticed anything. I never got any bad vibes from it, anything like that. It was mostly the people that were associated with it that she got the creepy feelings from, but no bad vibes. This was something I'd forgotten about, and I don't even know if anybody ever reported on this or not, but I remember one time one of the older sisters took the ball outside because, like I said, we're doing our little homegrown experiments at this point, and she took it out and she sat outside with it in the sun and had it out there for about probably an hour in direct sunlight in Florida. You know, we're in the grass.
Yeah.
She takes it back in. It was hot for several days. It did not cool down.
Oh, really?
But there was a lot of stuff going on. And once you get creepy people involved, I think just the energy that people put out, I think if you have weird people with weird energy or negative intentions coming in, it does bring something into the situation that normally wouldn't be there. You know, and you do sense that, and you do feel it. And I'm sure that she was picking up on some of that, but I think most of her thoughts toward the ball weren't premonition. They were just deduction from what we saw.
I want to go back to the house just for a second. With regard to sort of the haunting of the house and that stuff, did that continue, or that was only just kind of the odd occurrence here and there? You know, I would have said, oh, well, maybe the ball was just a ball and it was being influenced by whatever was in the house. However,
like a haunted object.
Yeah, a haunted object. But it was taken on the road and it was demonstrating strange behavior in other places as well.
And where they filmed it. You know, that's the other thing. People go, oh, this was a hoax. Well, I wasn't there, and we weren't there when they're rolling it up this glass sheet,
right?
You know, out in the middle of the parking lot. That was videotaped. So,
is any of that video anywhere? Have you ever seen? Because we couldn't find anything.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea. You know, there used to be tons of pictures, and there was a thing called Curlin photography that people did back in the day. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
They had done like some Curlin photography of the ball and just got all kinds of really weird pictures where, you know, in Curlin photography, you see the energy or the auras of things, and the ball had just weird, it's almost like when you look at a picture of the sun and they show the solar flares shooting off, it kind of looked like that.
Wow.
So it was, who knows what that was coming off of it. But those are things that you can't fake it. Or maybe, I'm sure you can now, but in 1974, the days of the Polaroid, that would have been a hard thing to fake. And we certainly didn't do it. If somebody faked it, that's on somebody else. But I know our family never had any skin in the game as far as proving what it was or wasn't to anybody. So there was no hoax. There was no manipulation of things on our end ever.
Why did the family leave the house?
Because Antoine retired and he had asbestosis, you know, from working with asbestos, and he was not in the best of health, and it was a huge house. And after all the kids graduated high school and went away to college, it's just two people in this giant house. A company came in called Fairfield Communities that wanted to buy the house and all the land that Jerry owned, because she owned a ton of land, and they wanted to build a resort there on the island. But they ran into some problems with the EPA, and it would have been a drain on the aquifer and a lot of that. So they had already bought the land from Jerry. They couldn't proceed with their plans. So they ended up selling it back to the state, you know, just for pennies on the dollar, just to get out from underneath it. So, but she sold it just because she couldn't take care of it. She was getting older and she had bigger fish to fry and, you know, other things to do. So she left. That's why we left the house.
There's some reports that say there's asbestos in the house as well. Is that something you're familiar with?
This goes back to Antoine. There was a boiler that provided the heat for the house with steam radiators. And on the pipes, he would bring home the asbestos material. You know, it's like cloth with the powder on it. And he would wrap the pipes in that. That would have been there. Yeah, that would have been down in the boiler room. But as far as the house itself, I mean, it was all like horsehair plaster, you know, with the old plaster and beautiful woodwork. It was just an amazing place.
Right.
To look at it. It was absolutely beautiful. It just was too much for her. I forget what the square footage was, but it was probably around 7,000, 8,000 square feet. And, you know, two old people don't need that.
Right.
So, you know, she moved. But I've gone back and looked at it, and it's deteriorated horribly. It just breaks my heart because the house, part of it's caved in. People have broken in. The windows are boarded up. And it was just such a spectacular place. And the last time I went in, I actually broke in. I'm probably going to get arrested if you guys send anybody after me.
Well, we're not going to tell anybody,
yeah,
who you are. So
I actually broke in with a girlfriend of mine, and there's a balcony that's on this turret of the house, and I knew the ins and outs of that place. So we broke in, and a big thunderstorm came, and we just sat with the doors open to the balcony and watched it just rain and lightning, and it just felt like my goodbye to the place.
Yeah.
Because everything else was boarded up, and it was sad because I thought this place probably won't be here. By the time I'm an old person, it'll have gone back to the earth. But it was a really cool place. Very, very neat.
We really cannot thank you enough for coming on this show. This has been probably one of my favorite interviews we've ever done in 130 episodes.
Yeah. Oh my God, you guys are so sweet.
Well, I mean,
but it's, that's the cool thing is we're listening to this. It clears up so much of what's out there. And there's not a whole lot out there, but we really appreciate the fact that it sets the record straight on a lot of this.
That's what we like to do.
Yeah, because people aren't, they're not trying to be deceitful. They're just borrowing information that they've gotten somewhere else where they've gotten that from somewhere else. And it started off not completely true. And that's what the record is. Yeah. So it's just any opportunity. And this was a fantastic one to really add some truth to the record of this story and also the nature of the people, because that's another thing that is it's not just an event with an inanimate object. There are people behind this and a family name. And we always value the opportunity to bring the truth to light about who these people were and what they're really like. And so we thank you for that. That's a great opportunity.
Thank you guys. And like I said, I kind of vetted you, when you contacted me, because I know how a lot of the interviews have gone in the past. And they have been very almost tongue-in-cheek, as if we're trying to, like I said, pull something over, and we're not. And so I wanted to stay away from that. And then I also wanted to stay away from the crazy people camping in the yard again, because they're still out there. They are still out there. And once in a while, they pop up. We still get weird emails once in a while where they've figured us out or tracked us down, or somebody will just show up. Hey, are you Jerry Betz? And yeah, I remember you from 1974. It's like, well, okay, that's creepy. So, so we kind of backed off. But when I vetted you guys and I listened to some of your podcasts, and I realized that no matter what, and I can tell sometimes what your thought may be on it, but you're so even-handed about everything. I mean, you put every possibility out there and you research it. You guys do your homework a lot. I mean, more than a lot of television shows I see. You guys really, really do your homework. And I thought if anybody's going to tell the story and tell it right and kind of clarify some things, I felt like I wanted it to be you guys, and I'm going to be a listener now. You guys got me hooked.
Oh, awesome. I think this is going to go down in our archives as something that really sets the record straight. So thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you for setting the record straight, because I feel like there is a lot of misinformation, and I would love to think that somebody that listens to your podcast goes, oh my gosh, I know exactly what this is. I would love to hear that as your ending.
I don't know if we're going to be able to do that ending she's requesting. I know exactly what this is. Truthfully, though, I want to thank her for the kind words. It's actually a little bit of a sad moment for me that we're wrapping up this interview with her.
Well, the show part, but
super interesting.
Yeah, the connection to AL and a new friendship continues on.
Yes, it does.
And there are always new adventures when you meet people to embark on. And she has a really interesting life, and interesting things continue to happen to her and her family, let's just say.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
If we could talk more without compromising her anonymity, we would. But
no,
anyway.
but it was a fantastic sentiment, and really makes us feel great that we are doing this justice.
Well, I want to talk about some of the things that
speaking
that
of doing it justice,
yeah, this is pretty amazing. It's a revelation in a way that the organ music, first of all, that did happen.
Yes.
But it did not overlap with the presence of the sphere. In fact, most of that took place 4 or 5 years, maybe even 6 years before the sphere came into their lives.
Yeah. So, I was under the impression also that it was happening a little bit concurrently with the presence of the sphere, but apparently not so. It happened, but when the ball got there to reside at the house, it really wasn't happening then.
Right. Here's the other thing. That house, it's got quite a story. There was a lot going on there. And she made it clear it wasn't the whole time they were there by any stretch. There was there were some unusual events. And
it's like, there's comparisons to the Sally house.
Yeah.
That is one of the most active places I've ever heard of or come across. But it's not like it was all day 24/7, because people think like, oh my gosh, like how could you even stand to live there? It's like, well, most of the time it's okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of weird stuff happening. And for that house, often, but sporadically.
Yeah.
Here, it's just a few strange things that were happening that kind of let you know the house is special.
There were more things that happened at the house that she wasn't comfortable sharing publicly,
Yeah.
but that she told us off the record, and it was a legit, straight-up haunting. When you think about that photo, that's the other thing. She wasn't really sure who was in the picture. I think she said it was a daughter of the Neff family or something like that. But
Yeah, kind of a flapper of the 20s looking
yeah, it was a
person.
woman. But here's the other thing. What if that was the Neff mother that died in the fire in Michigan? What if that's why the picture was burned?
It got burned. You never know. Those kind of messages from beyond are often reported. Well,
And the chair was smashed under the picture, too.
Yeah.
Smashed to bits, she said.
yeah, I don't know what the reason for that is, but obviously one of those things that she said a lot of people were breaking in, but the house was secure at this point.
Yeah, but my thing is, if you're breaking into a house, you're a typical vandal or whatever.
Yeah, you're going to take stuff, not smash one chair and then leave.
Smash a chair and then burn the middle of a picture and then bail. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. And it's pretty crazy. By the way, we have a picture. It's not a wonderful picture, but we have a picture. And when I say not wonderful, what I mean is the quality isn't great by
it's in the background.
By her own admission, but where you can see the photo still hanging on the wall with the burn in the middle of it, but it's in the distance. It's kind of small. It was taken right after it happened. So that's pretty amazing. And it's amazing that we got that picture. So thank you for that.
Right. So the big question in relation to the activity of the ball, is it connected? Well, I don't know. Did that kind of energy have any effect on the ball itself? Who can say? It seems the ball did its things when it was taken away from the house. In front of the National Enquirer panel, it did some stuff in the parking lot that was recorded on film and by still photo. So it didn't need the house, but I wonder, is one energy act on the other? Who knows? But it's interesting, though, that there are two concurrent. So you wonder about the house, like, oh, no, that's another story. That's a whole haunted house story of its own. It just happened to also have a very mysterious, possibly intergalactic ball, residing at it for a few months.
Yeah.
Well, didn't people try to break in there recently to film it?
One of the articles, and I can't find, this source got lost among like 75 tabs that I have open in Chrome here, but there was one article I read about recently, I think within the past couple years, that a film crew had gone there to make a Blair Witch type thing.
Oh, you know what? That was mentioned, I do believe, also by Tim Gilmore, the blogger and writer.
Maybe that's where I read it. He
possibly
said some strange things happened and they got spooked and fled without finishing their project.
Well, I don't think that they were totally sanctioned to be there. I think they thought they could break in and do some guerrilla filmmaking and could not go through with it.
Yeah.
Because they got creeped out. But, according to him, it's the kind of area where, young people go to do their things late at night. And a lot of them will report being creeped out or seeing stuff. And again, he would say mostly towards the plantation area and the slave quarters, which, that seems to be also very common with haunted plantation type places. But especially with this one, and maybe not so much at the house, but the whole area has an aura of mystery.
When we do a multi-part series like this, there's always a drop-off from the part.
Is there?
Yeah, the audience share goes down a little bit.
Oh, I thought that was just me. I tend to drop off with my interest. No.
So there's probably a fair amount of people that didn't make it to part 4.
That's true.
And for those people that didn't make it to part 4, you're going to miss something fun. We are now officially announcing that we have acquired yet another piece of evidence that no one has ever seen before outside of the Betz family.
And probably the military.
Yes.
And the government.
Well, the military made it. That's right, folks. We now have a copy of one of the X-rays of the Betz sphere that was taken as part of the initial investigation that the U.S. Navy did at Cecil Field. And this X-ray is very, very interesting. It shows the interior of the sphere. And for me, it was extremely shocking, not because of what was there, but because of what wasn't there.
You mean a tiny miniature alien with working levers and gears?
Honestly, I was expecting a mechanism of some kind.
Really?
And I was thinking a terrestrial mechanism. I'll talk more about that in our theories.
Right.
But for now, I just want to say that it's quite a revelation. And we have taken these photos and put them on a hidden webpage at our website at astonishinglegends.com. So what you're going to find there is you'll see the original photo that we got, and that picture is a photocopy of the X-ray, so it's actually inverted. So I took that picture into Photoshop and Lightroom and inverted it back so that it would reflect what the original X-ray would look like. We then did some contrast enhancement and that sort of thing and did some close-ups of different sections of it. So you're going to see a whole bunch of pictures on that web page, but they're all based on the one original one that you'll see that is white, and it's kind of a piece of paper you'll see, which has some creases in it because it's very old.
Yeah.
It seems as though it was placed on a copier. That came to us directly from Jerry Betz. So the link to get to that is going to be astonishinglegends.com/X-ray, X-R-A-Y. So astonishinglegends.com/X-ray. After this show's been up a few days, I'll go ahead and add them to our social media as well.
Yeah. Boy, I hope that URL works.
Yeah, we don't know. We haven't built it yet.
We're
making a prediction here.
Yeah.
In light of that, and in light of the fact that we've actually seen the X-rays, which is unbelievable.
No, it's one of the persisting questions since its discovery. Where did this thing come from? Who made it? Why? What's it supposed to do? And what's inside it?
Yeah, how does it work?
Yeah.
How does it work?
Yeah.
And that's what the X-ray should tell you. All right, so let's talk about our analysis of the X-ray here.
Well, in this part here, I contacted a family member of my own, who we're going to call Dr. Mike, because Mike's his first name. But he's a physician.
Dr. Mike.
Yes, and his specialty, he's a diagnostic radiologist. So he specializes in X-rays and diagnosing people's conditions from their X-rays. So we sent them over to him. I never asked, I don't want to bother family members with requests like this. Other people's family, sure. My own, no, he listens to the show fairly frequently and is up on it. So does his mother, which is kind of fun.
Hey, guys.
Yeah, Scott's saying hello. No. So I just said, hey, would you be interested in taking a look at this? He deals in humans. It's a round piece of metal, but there's an X-ray. Again, it's not the original X-ray, which would be ideal for him to make a much better analysis, and that's all known. So, of course, having the original X-ray would be the best for him to give an assessment. But again, this is not a human being. This is not tissue and bone. But he does know about X-rays in general, and he knows what densities look like and little artifacts and stuff. And, of course, what's hard with this one is that we are seeing a photocopy. We don't have the original film, which is what it would have been on. Nowadays, I believe they're all digital. But back then, you stick the actual film that's been shot and developed like regular movie camera film or still camera film, and you look at it on a light table, and they're able to tell from that kind of what's going on inside you. So I had my cousin, Dr. Mike, just take a look at it and say, well, is there anything that you can kind of glean from this, just in general? And we know you don't have the best materials to work with, but do you get any ideas, impressions? Can you explain what we're looking at a little bit? And that is what he did. And so Scott's going to describe here what the actual X-ray looks like. And then after that, we're going to tell you about Dr. Mike's analysis of this based on what he knows. And again, he would say this would be low-level physics for a physician because they have to know about physics, but at a lower level than, say, a physicist would.
Right.
But what's great about that is that he's able to explain it in a way that us lay people could understand, much like explaining difficult concepts to a patient. So that was kind of cool. He was kind enough to go through it and make some observations. But before we get into that, tell us what we're looking at, Scott.
Well, if you were to look at this picture, if you're able to see it now, for those of you that are driving or commuting or whatever and unable to get to the website right now, it's kind of an eerie image in a way. And this is what we want to remind everybody. What the Navy told Jerry Betz was that their 150 kilovolt X-ray machine could not penetrate the sphere. So they then had to X-ray it with a 300 kilovolt X-ray machine. And this machine was so powerful that not only did it penetrate the sphere, it rendered the stainless steel or whatever alloy kind of shell it had invisible. So what you're seeing in the X-ray is really just the contents of the sphere, according to those reports.
Right. You're seeing a density of the outer shell, but it is kind of faded out in a way. So it'd be hard to understand exactly what you're looking at, and even harder, again, for Dr. Mike to assess what's really going on there, what we're looking at. Again, he's not a metallurgist. He's just saying, well, I understand densities, and I understand things that show up on X-rays, and I can kind of explain that, because that's an interesting thing. There are different densities that you do see, but that were described by Dr. Harder. to begin
That's
with.
right. They
Yeah.
were. So this X-ray lines up with all the discussion that we've had about the sphere and what the X-rays looked like,
Right.
including what our guests said that they looked like as well. And one of the things that you might remember her describing was that it had a cavity inside of it about the size of an orange. And you do see that. You see
Yeah.
a shift in the densities where there is a change in density in the interior. But the most surprising thing is the three smaller objects inside the sphere at the center of the sphere.
Yeah.
That matches exactly what the family has been saying and what everybody's been saying. It looks like three spherical objects or tiny little balls maybe on first glance when you look at it from an arm's length distance.
Right.
However, when you look even closer at the three spots in the middle, one of them appears to be more like a splotch or a splatter of some kind.
It's smeared, possibly. That's something that had liquid
Exploded?
inside. Yeah, that burst.
Yeah.
That was my impression.
It reminds me a little bit of like when you have a raw egg and it has maybe some blood in it or what,
Yeah.
like that little spot that you see, or like a spot you would see in your eye if you
Yes.
had.
Burst blood vessel?
Yeah, it's organic
yeah,
looking.
right.
It's organic looking.
Well, here's as above, so below. What's interesting to me upon first glance at the image was that it's got a real vibe of being
Yeah.
a celestial image, like
Yeah.
something you would see with a real high power telescope that has not been computer enhanced or defined. There's something about it that looks like it's from outer space in a weird way, because it looks like a planet, like a really distant planet that's not
Exactly.
totally in focus, but there's other elements of this planetary object, which could be a gas planet, whatever it is. And in the center are denser, tiny spherules about the size of a BB. They look like there's two that are the same diameter.
Roughly the same size. I would say the one that's splattered or flat or whatever that is the biggest.
Yeah.
It's 3 or 4 times bigger, I would say, than the other two that you can see.
But kind of
And
matches that initial description, remember?
Yes,
Remember? Yeah.
it still has a spherical overall shape to it, or a circular shape. The second one is a teeny bit bigger than the third one.
Mhm.
They almost look like little moons.
There's a real celestial vibe about this thing.
It also looks as though it could be something orbiting something else, but you just don't know that. And the other thing, one of the first things that Dr. Mike said, and I would reiterate, is, one view is the same as no view. I
Yeah.
can't remember what he said specifically, but the idea is we don't know if we're looking at this from the top or the side
Right.
or what angle it's at. So if you were able to have the other angles, then you could determine whether these were two-dimensional anomalies on the inner surface of the cavity, or
right.
if they were three-dimensional floating anomalies. We don't really know that. So
Yeah, just picture this. I found this helpful to imagine it this way. If you're seeing an X-ray of, just say it's a basketball, well, looking at it straight on, your view is going to penetrate the outer skin of the ball, but the edges, since you're looking at them on edge, will appear thick. So it will look like a circle, because you are looking through the thickest part of the side edge here. But the problem, as Scott just said, is that you're only getting one view. You're not getting 360 degrees or even a two-dimensional view of it. You're seeing it one view straight on, and we don't know if it's from the top down. We don't know if it's from the side. That would make a difference, because if it was top down, then maybe these three little pieces are just resting on the bottom of this inner cavity.
Right.
If it's from the side, these things are floating in there,
Which means they're suspended somehow.
they're suspended either in some kind of liquid, I don't know, gas, or they're levitating on their own.
Yeah.
And that doesn't surprise me based on what our guest said this thing would do, is that she'd hear these little balls ping by themselves on the side. It would do it when you shook it up, but also you didn't have to shake it up. Occasionally you hear this ding, and the family thought it was these little tiny particles inside hitting the inside shell or something inside.
Yeah,
it was moving on its own.
as it was moving around. And then the only other thing that we noticed that was interesting is there's some sort of anomaly on the outer edge of the sphere at about 7 o'clock. But it's hard to know, because the quality is so bad, whether that is a problem with the actual paper that it was photocopied on, or the X-ray itself, if it got bent.
Yeah.
And Dr. Mike will address that a little bit. To me, it seems like it could be an access point to get to the interior of the sphere, but we know
It
for a
seemed like
fact,
that, yeah.
we know for a fact you could not see that from the outside.
Right.
That's just the other interesting thing to consider. So why don't we get into what Dr. Mike said about the X-rays?
By means of an email, which he sent to me, Dr. Mike starts off by explaining the basic process of radiographic image production. Very simply, he says a source emits an X-ray photon. When that X-ray hits film, it exposes it, turning it black. Areas not hit by X-rays remain white. So he's kind of telling you what an X-ray is, how it works, and what you're looking at here when you see this image. Regarding our image of the sphere, your print is an inverse, like a print of a negative. So the opposite is the case. In other words, most of the photons have hit the film in the white areas, less in the black. Point number 3. An X-ray photon has an energy measured in kilovolts. Normal diagnostic X-ray energy is 20 to 120 kilovolts. For your print, or in the case of your print, they used 300 kilovolts to penetrate the steel nickel. Whether an X-ray photon gets blocked by an object depends on the following things. The object's density, so metals are densest, noble gases are less dense. Its atomic number, higher means more electrons to interact with the X-ray. Another factor is the thickness of the object parallel to the X-ray path. So, and he says in parentheses, a long rod oriented in the direction of the X-ray beam has a higher chance of absorbing or scattering the X-ray. And the energy of the X-ray. So those are the factors that the photon has to depend on to produce this image you're seeing. So he goes on to explain basically, how the atomic numbers of different materials will affect the image. Less dense, lower atomic number objects are less likely to be detected inside the metal container. So the reason that that's important is that if you remember, Dr. Harder said that those little spherules inside were of an extraordinarily high atomic number, maybe even ones we didn't even know about.
Right.
They were off the charts.
140,
Yeah.
I think he suggested.
Yeah, so those were special. There's something special about those. And so that's why they would appear different in this X-ray. So the point to the last comment that Dr. Mike made was that whatever is the suspension material that these tiny high atomic number particles are in is why you're not seeing it as a mass, because that's much lower density. These tiny spherules are of a high atomic number, therefore that's why they're showing up pretty clearly. Now, what we can't see from our image are these so-called energy halos described by Dr. Harder. But that might be the quality of the film itself and that we're seeing a photocopy. It's just not making the translation. It's getting lost in translation. But that was widely reported by Dr. Harder, that somehow these things are giving off visible halos of energy of sorts. Now, here's another point that Scott made earlier, which is why this is a less than desirable amount of material to do an observation from or an analysis. Dr. Mike says, there is only one view of the object. In radiology, we say one view is no view. This is because you are taking a 3D object and displaying it on a 2D surface. The spots inside the object might be flat, spheres, or long rods that are parallel to the X-ray beam. Their location is also not clear. They can be anywhere from the X-ray source housing, surface of the object, interior of the object, far surface, towards the whatever's backing this thing is sitting on, the X-ray intensifier screen, or the X-ray film. They could be created by the copying process. So you see what he's saying here. It's like those spheres could be anywhere in there.
Yeah, you can't tell from one X-ray necessarily where they are.
Which, as we just mentioned, that makes an important point of analysis. Where are these things inside the sphere? If it is shavings, as a lot of people will say that's what's rattling around, then naturally they should rest at the bottom, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
So that makes sense if you're looking from the top down. They're sitting in the bottom. And again, if they're just shavings, why are they floating in the middle of this thing?
If it's a side view.
Yeah. And as they said, as the Navy said, this shell's a half-inch thick, and that's all there is inside of it, with some shavings that rattle around. Well, then a side view would totally turn that on its head.
To be absolutely clear, in terms of the shell being a half-inch thick, the inner cavity appears to be much smaller.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it appears that there's something between the inside of the shell and the outer edge of the innermost cavity.
Right.
There's something there of a different density even.
Yeah. So what this is relaying to us is there are different densities inside this thing, obviously. No gears, no metal working parts, no levers, but material of varying densities, which matches the original reports. So we know that that's true. So that's really interesting. In this case, we're not sure what to believe, especially from all the newspaper reports and what the Navy's telling us, because there are no hard copy reports to review. You're only going by statements made to the press at the time. Well, Dr. Mike goes on to explain why some things don't have sharp margins. Why aren't you seeing clearly defined images and features in this X-ray. And he says objects closer to the film will have sharper margins. Think of your hand making a shadow puppet. As it gets closer to the wall, the edges are sharper. The small lesions, I think he means the spherules, as a doctor would call them lesions, inside the object are sharper, especially the round ones, suggesting they are closer to the film, and that is the actual X-ray film. The margins of the sphere are not sharp. Usually a metal object will have a very abrupt margin with the air. Instead, we see a wide donut of fuzzy gray. I think this is because the X-ray source was placed very close to the object and diffused by the shadow, like in the hand puppet example. When you go to look at the X-ray, you might wonder, like, why can't I see, if it's a metal ball, why am I not seeing a very clear round edge on this thing? Wouldn't we see that? Because it's metal. It's not like it's made out of felt.
Yeah.
It's a hard image, and that's what Dr. Mike is saying. Like, normally you would see that, but there might be varying reasons why we're not. He has kind of a theory on these three spherules, which he calls lesions, in the center of the sphere. As a guess, he says, I think these are likely surrounded by air inside the object or an artifact on the film or created while developing the film. Now, keep in mind, this is before he's heard the whole story.
Yes.
He's just looking at this image.
Yes.
They have some characteristics of a liquid. The smaller round lesion has a short tail, and that's the one that we thought might be burst, like a drop that has moved a short distance.
That is when you heard our guest earlier describing and other descriptions that say there seem to be wires coming out of the little balls inside the sphere.
That's right.
That's what that is. And that's the one that we were saying that looks kind of burst and kind of organic in nature. It has a thin, almost hair-like wiry hair thing that comes down at about 4 or 5 o'clock and is fairly long. It's not super easy to see because it's filament-esque.
Right.
But it is in there, and you can't tell where it goes. It just kind of trails off. But that's what Dr. Mike's talking about here.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, he says the larger angular lesion has smaller, round, droplet-like densities next to it.
Yes.
Like you would see in a splatter. Maybe these are two drops that were hanging on the inside of the surface like a stalagmite that cooled down, and the third one had dropped to the other side of the sphere, making a splatter. I think that they may be made of the same or similar materials as the sphere shell. If they are on an opposite inner sphere, this might explain why the smaller dots, closer to the film, have a sharper margin than the angular lesion. So he's talking about the angular lesion, the one with the irregular edges.
Yes.
And the two more clearly defined dots.
Yes.
You know, he goes on to say that basically, yeah, it's hard to tell because there are a lot of artifacts on the print. You can't see one side of the sphere. There are wrinkle artifacts within the paper itself that we were looking at, and maybe on the film itself. There is quite a bit of noise in the image. And what he means by that is just artifacts and distortion. It's not the most crisp thing. There's also a thin black line heading down from the largest angulated lesion in the 5 o'clock position. So that's what Scott was talking about. Is this a thin metal seam artifact, or who knows? Question mark. Which I find interesting because is that a working part on this thing inside? So that kind of wraps up his general explanation or thoughts on this thing without without having heard the interview or read the articles about it. He's just somebody who's an expert at looking at X-rays, is giving you his opinion on what he's seeing as far as densities are concerned and possible materials and things to consider when you look at the X-rays, that there's a lot about it we don't know. But what we do know is that, again, as far as we can tell, there's no moving parts in this thing. So what gets it to roll?
That is really the biggest question for me. When I saw these, it ruled out the theory I had been leaning towards the most as we were working through all our research.
Yeah.
So after he sent that first round of information back, I actually had a couple of extra questions that I wanted to send to him. I'm not going to go through all of those here, but we'll make those available in the show notes if you're interested in them. But I did want to read the last one that he sent here because I had asked him about calculating density based on X-rays. This was his response. There is no way to calculate the density of the inner spheres based on the optical density in the image. The optical density, what you see as darker, is a function of the sensitivity of the film, the thickness and type of X-ray intensifier screen used. The number of X-rays hitting the film cassette is determined by the density of the object, the atomic number of the object, and the thickness of the object. We can't even compare it to the density of the shell because it is in a different environment. You can't say it is denser than the shell because it is surrounded by air or gel. He actually sent us an additional X-ray of a person. And then in that one, he talks about how you can compare a water density in a smaller vessel to the density of two overlapping calcified ribs.
Mm-hmm.
He says he suspects it is about the same density as the shell. He said it's not wood, not plastic. It could be denser than the shell, but he can't tell with regard to the small objects inside. So he's not saying for sure, just because you can see those on the X-ray, that they definitely have some high atomic number. He's saying you can't determine that from the X-ray.
No.
To be completely clear. And he did some diagrams on the shots that we sent him where I had inverted them back to what they should look like in Photoshop and Lightroom. And we've got those posted with this particular episode. So
the 3 dots inside, again, it looks celestial to me, like an Orion's belt.
Yeah, it does look like Orion's belt. Yeah.
Lined up, 3 dots going from a 1 or 2 o'clock position to like a 7, almost an 8 o'clock position. So, and because I think you can't see the defined outer shell, it's very ghostly looking.
Yeah.
But you can tell, obviously, and even Dr. Mike could, he's made circles, concentric circles, where he's pointed out a denser outer layer, a less dense ring or hollow sphere inside, and a denser inner ring where the 3 spherules reside. So even to his eye, there are different densities inside this thing. He just can't explain why or could give an accurate assessment without looking at more. So to wrap up this section here, I just wanted to revisit some of the comments by Dr. Harder and why he may have known what he knew. He obviously had seen images that were really good, the original X-rays of this thing, and who knows what else, because he was there when they examined it. But this is in relation to the X-ray image. I don't think this made it into our interview with Rob Christofferson, but in our Twitter conversation, he was talking about Dr. Harder and different metals, and we started talking about magnesium. That came up in our little mini bio of Dr. Harder. And Rob said that in talking about that metal that Dr. Harder was interested in with the high magnesium content, on one of our imminent disclosure episodes that we did with him, he talked about Robert Richardson hitting a UFO with his car. Imagine reporting that to Allstate. Yeah. Well, when they tested the bumper of the car, there was a high concentration of magnesium where it looked like the chrome had been shaved off. That came from a Dr. Harder investigation, and that may have been why he was then fascinated from then on about metallurgy, magnesium, but a really refined state of magnesium, which commonly wouldn't seem like a good metal for a spaceship, but if you were to refine it and process it, it could be. Lightweight, hard, withstands a lot of beating. The summation of his ideas, though, about the X-ray was that the X-ray should show a sphere in a donut shape. But it didn't. The X-ray from the Navy showed 2 internal spheres, and this is after their 300 kilovolt X-ray bombardment had made the outer shell invisible, which we just got done talking about. That's why you don't see a very clearly defined outer line. Yeah, right. An outer circle here. So he goes on to say that this indicates that the internal material is much more dense than the stainless steel shell. Therefore, a lot of the weight in the internal material and the shell itself could be thinner than half an inch. Now, this does contradict, it seems, a little from what Dr. Mike was saying about how that could be determined from an X-ray. But then again, density, but then again, Dr. Harder certainly had more information than Dr. Mike. Yeah. He's looking at one crummy image that we provided him.
Yeah, Dr. Harder may have had more X-rays than just the one.
He may have had more X-rays, other data from other tests they did that we just don't know about.
And to that point, I think we could say that we know that Dr. Harder and others had more X-rays and more access to research that had been conducted on the sphere. And with that information, they still described 3 spheral type objects that were residing inside the center of the sphere. Mm-hmm. So even though we only have the one view to go on, I think we can make an assumption, and maybe it's an unsafe assumption, that they had more than one view and that they were able to conclude from the additional views that they are actual small spherical objects inside the sphere itself.
So this is a quote here, a little passage again. I think it's from Ronald D. Story's Encyclopedia of UFOs and his coverage of this. He goes on to say that Dr. Harder, based on his X-ray studies, determined that the 2 internal spheres are made of elements far heavier than anything known to science, while the heaviest element yet produced in any atomic reactor here on Earth has an atomic number of 105, and the heaviest element occurring naturally on Earth is uranium, with an atomic number of 92. Dr. Harder claims to have determined that the Betz sphere has atomic numbers higher than 140. Then he goes on to say, like, if you drill into this thing, maybe it goes off like a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
And from all this, you can kind of sum up that Dr. Harder doubled down on the alien thing, which I think that puts a lot of people off.
Right.
You know, they would then discount anything he has to say because of this danger and because the object is still presumably under surveillance by its supposed alien makers. He warned against anybody going to Florida to take this thing apart. I mean, he knows how people are going to take this. Was he saying this to maybe protect the Betz family who became friends of his?
Yeah, they were friends with him all the way up until his death just a few years ago.
Yeah.
It was very clear that of the relationships that evolved for them between Dr. Harder and Dr. Hynek, there were friendships or relationships of a kind between both of them, but it seemed that they stayed pretty close to Harder for the duration of his life. Maybe he was doing that to protect them.
You don't know how much he believed. Definitely he believed that aliens exist, that he believed that people get abducted sometimes, that he believed that there's technology far greater than ours out there. And we may have come across some of it here in this ball, but be careful. There's a warning that comes with it. You don't know what you're messing with, if that's the case. Do you think if someone captured Bigfoot, they would send another one to take his place?
Well, that depends. I mean, even if they have several big feet applying for the job, how can the Bigfoot Replacement Bureau, otherwise known as the BRB, know that they're getting the right candidate for the job?
Well, yeah, slapping in any old Bigfoot that comes along into that gig would not be smart.
It would be a bad plan. But here's something else that is smart. Go into ZipRecruiter.com/legends to hire the right replacement Bigfoot or person.
Well, ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. We should have tried this a while back if we wanted to find Bigfoot.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Its powerful matching technology scans thousands of resumes, identifies people with the right skills, education, and experience for your job, and actively invites them to apply. So you get qualified candidates fast. That's why ZipRecruiter is rated #1 by employers in the U.S. And this rating comes from hiring sites on Trustpilot with over 1,000 reviews.
And right now, our listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/legends. That's ZipRecruiter.com/legends.
ZipRecruiter.com/legends.
ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire.
There's a brand new podcast that just premiered on the Parcast Network, and it could not be more apropos to this series.
It's all about mysterious spaceballs or industrial ball valves?
Well, I guess those might be mentioned somewhere. No, but this new podcast of theirs is all about extraterrestrials.
What's it called again?
Extraterrestrial.
Oh, right. No, I'm just kidding. I knew that because we've known about this new show of theirs for a while now, and we couldn't wait for it to begin airing. It doesn't matter how much you already know about the phenomena or how much you just want to know. We all end up having the same fundamental human questions. Are we alone? Do aliens really exist? I think people that have had a close encounter believe so, but what about the rest of us who try to go off the facts to make a decision?
We've heard some pretty crazy accounts from very credible people, and of course, there are a lot of famous cases. So every week, the Parcast Network's new podcast, Extraterrestrial, examines these stories with a critical eye, analyzing possible scientific explanations, determining what really may have happened. It seeks to answer that question of whether or not we are really alone.
Well, I wouldn't look to government for any answers because the Pentagon spent over $100 million researching UFOs and still have nothing to show for it, or so they claim. In fact, some might say they're hiding something from us. Extraterrestrial will dig deep into the evidence to determine the truth. Do they really have something to hide?
New episodes of Extraterrestrial come out every Tuesday, and look for upcoming episodes spotlighting reptilian humanoids and the 1977 UFO invasion at Fort Benning, Georgia.
You just can't beat a good alien reptile story. So go search and subscribe to Extraterrestrial wherever you listen to your podcasts. Again, that's EXTRATERRESTRIAL.
Or visit parcast.com/extraterrestrial to start listening now, and we'll see you there.
This is Darren,
And this is Gary from the Snipe Hunt Podcast.
and you're listening to Astonishing Legends.
Let's get back to the show.
I think you put a little bit too much pizzazz on
Did I?
So now that we've had a glimpse inside this thing, we're going to now tackle the arguments about what people thought this was before they could see inside of it. The popular skeptical arguments for this thing being nothing more than a common industrial steel ball. Those are the biggest theories out there, that is nothing special, because some of the other theories that it is special, but it's man-made, it's terrestrial, it's just out of place.
Yes.
Drastically out of place.
Yes.
But a highly specialized piece of equipment. But the most popular theories, I believe, on what this thing is that it's very pedestrian, very mundane.
Yes.
An
art ball.
I would count art ball number 2.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe the thing that comes up the most, though, is that it is an industrial ball valve ball.
Yes. Valve ball.
And the reason
BVB.
I thought it might
what
be
we
more
got
accurate.
here is your standard BVB.
An actual plumbing ball valve is the valve is shaped like a ball, but it has a hole in it. So when you turn the faucet there, the ball turns to either be perpendicular with that hole that lets water pass through it, or it turns and shuts off that connection.
Yes.
I believe what the case is here with the ball is that this thing floats inside a large tube, and that it comes against a stopper, and that creates the action of stopping the liquid from passing.
Yes.
Or it somehow regulates it. So where are people getting this idea? Well, I can't blame them, because it's coming from the papers and some quotes from people who might be in the know about this. And one of the better articles comes from the Lodi News Sentinel in an article dated Saturday, April 20th, 1974, and it's titled, 5 Scientists Meet Over Steel Ball Today. It describes the National Enquirer panel. Remember the UFO panel we've been talking about, the Blue Ribbon panel? But it also has quotes from people who think that they know what this thing is most definitely. And from here, people who want to further the argument that it is nothing special mostly point to this article and the comments therein. So one of them is from Robert D. Edwards, and he's president of a Jacksonville equipment supply firm. And he says the Betz ball matches exactly the type of stainless steel spheres which his company stocks for sale exclusively to pulp paper mills. You've heard of that argument, right? That
Yes.
St. Regis, I believe.
Our guest already mentioned that they had been in touch with the St. Regis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where they're getting this. It's like, hey, we make balls like that. So apparently the sphere is manufactured by a division of Bell & Howell in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and it's used in a huge valve which moves corrosive liquids and acids to the mill's digester tank where they're making the pulp for the paper. And this is where the wood chips are converted into pulp. So that makes sense. This guy's saying, like, well, we make these things. It sounds a lot like it. That's probably what it is. And he goes on to be quoted, I'm not saying that this thing didn't come from outer space because I've never seen it, said Edwards. All I'm saying is that the physical description of it matches exactly the type of ball we have in stock. And that some pulp paper mills have been discarding these types of balls for years now, several years, when the machines got switched over to a more modern digester process. So obviously these things have been out on the market, or they're going to the scrap heap because we're changing over to better technology. We don't use those anymore, but it sounds a lot like what we use. I love the fact that he is not saying it's not from outer space.
Yes.
Well, it could
He's
be.
also saying, I've never seen it.
Exactly. That's
I've
a key
never
point.
seen it. But it sounds just like mine.
Well, yeah. Well, you can understand why that would be, because Edwards, uncrated one of the stainless steel balls in the warehouse, and he had it weighed on an industrial scale while a reporter watched, and the weight was slightly more than 21 pounds. So that fits, right?
Right.
And I believe the diameter is very close too, and they're going off of what the U.S. Navy metallurgist examined, as we've been saying. So what they've been reporting is like, well, that fits pretty close. And the article kind of finishes up here saying that, well, Terry Betz and Jerry Betz have been saying that this ball displays weird characteristics, not typical of just a steel ball. And if you take that into account and believe that, then that's the big difference here. Their balls don't do that.
Yeah.
Well, Stanley Rose, he's director of marketing for Bell & Howell in Bridgeport, said he knew of nothing in the Bell & Howell spheres that would do that, of course.
That would cause
Well, that would be something, though.
Yeah.
Well, and he gets quoted here. Again, we'd like to see the sphere and examine it to determine if it's one of ours. Who knows? Maybe it was left by little green men from Saturn or Mars. So he's got a sense of humor, Stanley. Well, he's in marketing.
Well, how does he know which planet the little green men live on?
Well,
Why is he pitching Saturn?
We all know, that's my point. We all know little green men are on Mars.
Yeah.
I was not aware of the Saturn ones. I've never heard that. It's a gas planet, I believe.
Yeah.
He's having a little fun with it, but they never looked at the Betz sphere. They
Right.
know what they have, and it sounds very similar, and it does. You have to admit.
But here's the thing about balls.
Mhm.
Balls are everywhere.
They're
everywhere.
It's a very popular shape.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's not, we have something similar. Well, yeah, that's like saying I have something similar too. It's flat. We
Mhm.
have flat things. We have balls. We have things that are shaped like a triangle.
It's everywhere. So you got to think that an 8-inch diameter ball or somewhere thereabouts, made out of metal, depending what it is going to weigh about the same.
Yeah.
But they ain't going to go rolling on their own.
Yes.
If that's true. So that's why I'm saying.
You went real country there.
I think I just made up that whole, yeah.
They ain't going to go rolling on their own.
It's a little bit Italian, who knows?
Yeah.
And the whole story, as I said at the beginning of part 4, hinges on the fact that you believe what the Betz family has been saying, what reporters like Lou Anger had said about it when he saw it.
Yes.
Even CPO Berninger said it behaved strangely, he thought. Why would you say that about a regular steel ball? And I keep coming back to that because that is the crux. It's not just the Betzes saying that. You have to believe them, but you then also have to believe these other people that are saying that this thing's weird.
Yeah.
If there's any skeptical argument about this, what article would you say we get the most sent to us?
Brian Dunning stuff.
Of course.
It always is.
Yeah.
And he's good. He's thorough.
Exactly. And that's the reason I think we're going to cover it here.
And very impartial. He makes his determinations. I would say, for me, I feel like he is kind of quick to close the book on things.
Well, that's a
But
that's a skeptical trait.
But he also, unlike a lot of other skeptics in the field, I feel like he will also say, well, you know what? This part of it doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
And that's what I really admire about the way he approaches his analysis of things.
No, we covered a few stories where we did look into his point of view on stuff. And if he doesn't know, he's going to tell you. He's not going to say, well, it's obviously this, mystery solved, case closed. He may say, well, I don't really think that there's any kind of mystery here. It's more likely this, which is a prosaic answer. But he's not going to tell you you're an idiot, and just stop believing it because it's absolutely this, which you hear a lot. And that kind of personally bugs me. So I think he always makes a good framework for the well-rounded skeptical argument, which is why it was good to look at this one, his article here on the Betz sphere, because he's going off of all the known information that everyone else has at the time. He wasn't able to be fortunate enough to have the documents we've looked at and the testimony we've heard, but it wasn't available to him. So he's only going off of what everyone else has. And from that, he's made good points here about what people think it is, what it probably is, if that's all you have to go on. And that's why we're going to take a look at it here. Now, he starts by describing Dr. Hynek's point of view on this. And from his point of view, Brian Dunning, he's saying that Dr. Hynek really didn't have anything special to say about this. And he goes to the quote from Hynek, none will go so far as to say it's extraterrestrial. They would be putting their scientific reputations on the line. We made that quote
none,
before.
you're referring to the other members of the Blue Ribbon panel.
So none of us are going to say this thing's from outer space, except for maybe Dr. Harder, which I think he did. So there's people that, they know how his reputation is handled or viewed. That's the first point that Brian Dunning makes. Hynek didn't really have anything special to say about this, which now we've heard may not be true.
Well, he had a whole different opinion inside the Betz house that he told the Betz family.
Exactly.
Which is the polar opposite of this statement. That was what was available for Brian Dunning to research because he never publicly made the statement that he believed it was alien.
Exactly. He wouldn't have known that, but that's the first thing he's saying is that this Blue Ribbon panel really had not much to say about the sphere being special at all. But we know that it might not be extraterrestrial, but definitely displayed some unusual and maybe impossible actions for normal Earth physics. So then Dunning goes on to wonder, though, if this is possibly part of a spacecraft. Either orbiting spacecraft junk that fell to Earth, that's a logical conclusion, because it looks space age.
Yeah,
just by looking at it.
And we touched on this a little bit earlier in the series, about how much space junk is out there and that sort of thing.
Exactly, yeah. So Brian wonders, maybe it's a bladder tank for a spacecraft of some kind, or a satellite, something like that. Those are known to be round like that, but then they have obvious couplings on them. The fuel has to go in, like hydrazine, but it has to come out too.
Yeah.
And this thing had no openings on it.
Right.
So he rules that out. That's the first thing you think of, well, maybe that's what happened.
Yeah.
Some authors think that it was like a Sputnik-like satellite, because obviously there's a lot of visual similarities. Round, chrome, shiny, mysterious. And that was based on a large part what Carl Williston from the shadowy Omega-1 Institute said, because he was saying this thing gave off radio signals.
Yes.
It's a form of radiation, but not harmful like you think. But that's what Sputnik did. It beeped. You could pick it up on your ham radio.
Yeah.
That's a possibility. People were thinking that, like, well, okay, maybe it's a weird form of satellite that's top secret, maybe Russian. They were not shy to use nuclear fuels and were happy to do so. However, this thing has no antenna. There's nothing on it. It's totally smooth. So that does not fit with a satellite type device. As Brian says, there's no antenna. Sputnik had that. And he goes on to mention the other common things. We talked about this, the pig that's used for cleaning out big pipes, or a mandrel ball, which is used in large pipe and bending it. You can bend the metal around the ball on the inside. Maybe that's the reason for the hardness. But the sphere doesn't exactly match those descriptions either, so he's ruling that out. Now, on April 18th of that year, the Palm Beach Post reported that Lottie Robinson recognized the ball from some pictures in the paper. And she went and got one out of her own, out of her garage, where she said she'd had it for 15 years. And that's where technicians from the St. Regis Paper Company, the paper mill there, said it was, oh yeah, this is a ball valve. It's from one of our large pipes. That's what she had. She said, I don't know how he got it. Somehow it found its way to a scrap dealer where Mrs. Robinson's son got it and kept it in the garage. Now, here's the thing. It was very close in size and weight to the Betz sphere, but you can't say it's identical because you've not compared the two.
I love it how people keep finding similar balls and saying, oh, this is it. And they haven't seen the Betz sphere at all, never looked at it. They're just like, look, here's another ball that's kind of the same size and made of steel.
Yeah.
This must be what it is.
Right.
And then they're writing newspaper articles about this. And they haven't even seen the real Betz sphere. And with regard to the St. Regis thing, we have, and I'm going to just read a little bit from the transcript here from our interview subject, what she said about St. Regis. When we asked her, had they talked to St. Regis specifically about it? Yeah, we did. And we looked, we contacted, there was a paper mill nearby. It was called St. Regis at the time, St. Regis Paper Mill. And we talked to some of the guys there and we said, have you guys ever seen anything like that? And they said, quote, no, we don't use anything like that here. And that was the only thing we could think of. You know, there was really no other industry around, even that was a long way away from where we found it. So they talked to St. Regis about it. The people that had the Betz sphere, not people that had another ball in their garage for 15 years.
Yeah.
The chain of events for like the investigative skills in those regards. But I know the journalists are just trying to write stories.
No, look, it's as they would say, close enough for government work.
Yeah.
In that it's it's 8 inches. Maybe it's a few, I don't know, an ounce off.
Yeah.
But it's very close. So you want to, naturally gravitate. Again, mystery solved, put it to rest. That's what this is. We don't have to keep wondering or think it's weird. It's a normal, ordinary thing. But again, the points here is that, okay, I'm willing to buy that. If you produce one that's exactly the same as what the Betz has had, but no one's done that.
No, and in addition to that, everyone is just, all they're trying to do is match up the appearance.
Yeah.
Or the weight. And so, well, this one is about the same size and it's steel on the outside and it weighs, 20 pounds. It's pretty close. Nobody is saying, oh, and if you put it on a coffee table, it rolls around without going off the edges. There's no one saying anything like that.
No. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Well, Brian's conclusions here, based on that, and he's going off of newspaper reports at the time. Like I said, it's not fair to poke holes in them.
Yeah. And
because,
I'm not, and by the way, what I just was saying was directed more at the media at the time.
No, of course. Yeah, because it's just a fantastical kind of thing. They got to get a few quotes. It's fun. People will enjoy reading about it. But they're not really trying to get to the bottom of this thing, nor do they have the agency to do so. But going off of what can be gleaned from the accounts of the time, Brian is saying that, well, this thing sat on Terry's window seat for nearly 2 weeks, and it really did nothing or moved or anything like that until somebody took it down to examine it. Now, we know that that is not exactly the case, right?
Yes, based on the manuscript that we got that was written by a gentleman who was there and with the family and interviewed all of them, and also was part of the whole National Enquirer acquisition and attempted recovery of the sphere, which actually became a successful recovery. He was there for all of that, and he interviewed Terry, and Terry told him, oh, no, it was moving around on the windowsill. So that unwinds that a little bit.
Brian goes on to say that, again, from earlier, that Hynek, nor anybody else, none of those people corroborated Carl Wilson's assertion that it had odd magnetic properties or that it was broadcasting a radio signal. And he goes on to say that the only thing that Hynek and the other Enquirer panelists saw or noted was that when you shook it, it rattled. That was it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem to be the case as reported from people who were there, like Terry, because this thing performed for them. Rolling up the plexiglass when it should be rolling down.
That it did in front of a room full of people.
Yeah. Pretty weird. So that does seem to be true, is that this thing behaves strangely. And even Lou Enger, as we said, from the Tampa Bay Times, saw this thing roll back to him. So now we come to, in the article and in general, probably the second most popular theory on this, because somebody, again, has claimed that, no, this is a lot like something I had, and it's probably that.
Yes.
Not it is, it's probably that. And that would be the artist James Durling Jones, having said this thing may have fallen off of his VW van.
Yes.
When he came through the area. How that happened was there was a Coca-Cola salesman, a delivery guy, who came to the hotel that Durling Jones had managed in Taos, New Mexico. And he had seen the reports in the papers, and he noticed that some of these steel spheres were in, I believe, an installation or that Durling Jones had them. And he's like, "What? You got the Betz sphere?" According to him, it flipped out.
Yeah.
James Durling Jones had no idea this was going on, not seen the reports of anything. But he said, you got to contact the paper. And so that's how that happened and how he ended up in the papers. So basically, in these interviews with the paper here, what Durling Jones had said is that a few years back, he was in his Volkswagen bus collecting scrap metal for his sculptures. That's kind of his side project. He managed this hotel, but also was a sculptor and was very active. And he called himself a sphere freak. So he loved the shape. He loved making things with that. So a friend of his had supplied him with a number of balls from a large industrial ball valve system where this guy worked in two sizes, 8-inch, weighing about 22 pounds, so that matches. Some were 10-inch, and they weighed about 70 pounds. And because he had no room inside the car, he put them on the luggage rack and drove around, I think, from the Jacksonville area up through there, Easter around 1972, I believe. And on his way back to Taos, well, during that time, he lost a few of the balls. I can't imagine driving all that way with things rolling around on the roof.
Yeah.
It would drive me nuts. But that's where Durling Jones said, well, that's probably what happened. I went through the area. I lost a couple of those. They look to be about the same exact size. Again, this ties back to the ball valve thing, which is why it's so common, is that it's pretty close
Yeah.
in description. So anyway, he's giving a pretty good explanation for what these might be, that it's a ball valve, but it's somebody claiming ownership. And then he says they do rattle, but the rattle comes from trying to patch the sphere. He goes on to this article saying, well, the company drills the spheres and then re-welds them before machining them again. And sometimes some of the milling or drilling chips drop inside. Now, Durling Jones, he never mentioned the manufacturer of these balls so they could be compared, because what happened is his friend, I wouldn't say exactly stole them. Durling Jones said these balls were imperfect. They were not quality, mismanufactured. They were not useful in the process. They had to be discarded. And I think what happened here, what it sounds like, is that his friend who worked at this place was like, yeah, we're just going to dump these things or turn them in for scrap. I mean, they're worth something to the company, but we can't use them. You want them? I don't exactly have the authority to give them to you, but I'm just going to take them out to the scrap heap anyway, so you might as well have them.
Right.
You're not exactly stealing, but they're not exactly your property either to give them away.
Right.
He didn't want to get his friend in trouble, so he didn't want to mention what company that was, but it sounds like maybe Bill and Hal. I don't know. So something's going on here where somehow this guy gets steel balls and gives them to his friend because he uses them in these art installations. That all makes sense. However, again, no comparison has ever been made. They're close, but we don't know how close. And he never reported them doing anything weird either. The other thing we notice is that the Betz sphere has no drill hole on it.
Right.
That had been reported by NICAP that a drill hole was found, had been ground down and made smooth. That does not appear to be the case.
Right.
To wrap this up, and I think put the sculptor theory to rest here, is that in an article in the Las Cruces Sun News from April 24th, 1974, titled Taos Sculptor Solves Metal Ball Mystery. Even back in the 70s, it was mystery solved. Apparently, it was a great headline.
Yes.
Durling Jones makes some interesting statements again. Well, he was saying, yes, he was driving around a long ways. The car's loaded up, so he ended up with about 7 spheres left. He didn't know how many he had to begin with, so there's no accurate count. He just says, well, there's probably some rolling around on that route, but nobody ever reported anything like that since. Now, it makes sense, though, if somebody found them by the side of the road, maybe it's not such a big deal because it is a regular steel ball. Maybe they just took it home and forgot about it because it did not roll around. The other weird thing is that I'm not sure it's entirely possible this thing popped off and fell off his luggage rack, rolling around loose. Again, It seems kind of odd, but that's what he did. That luggage rack, I looked up for a VW van. probably is 5 or 6 inches. I couldn't
Yeah.
get any exact measurements.
Yeah.
This ball's only 8 inches in diameter,
Right.
which means only 3 inches of it sticks up above. You would have to hit a huge pothole, I think, or take a really sharp turn in an old VW van to get that thing to roll off. But who knows? I
Yeah.
don't know what he had it sitting on.
Right.
It was just sitting on a piece of luggage and it rolled off. We have no way of knowing. It just seems they weren't very well secured.
Yeah.
They weren't perfect. He describes that himself. This Betz sphere seemed to be, by all measurements, pretty perfectly machined to exacting standards. You hear that all the time. This thing was perfectly round, it seemed like. It seems like these other balls were defective enough that they were being discarded, but good enough for artwork that he was going to use them for. There you go. I mean, what do you think about that whole argument? Because again, that's like the biggest thing that even Brian Dunning says, his summation on this is that he doesn't think that the Betz family was trying to put anything over on anybody, just that maybe they misinterpreted the rolling. Well, maybe it was the floor. Maybe they just thought it came back to them. He couldn't be sure because he hadn't talked to them.
Yeah, I don't get that, because that's like, it's not just one person, it's the entire family. So
Right.
what, they're all in on it together and misinterpreting things. And then if all it is a steel ball that doesn't do anything, why are foreign agents or Men in Black or whoever offering $750,000 for it? Why is it going to a blue ribbon panel? Why is
Yeah.
it going to all these places if it's nothing more than a stupid ball that doesn't do anything?
Right. Well,
Like, who cares?
yeah.
So I don't understand
yeah.
how it's like, oh, they misinterpreted. That's the classic thing that you always say. Don't tell me what I saw. They misinterpreted it. It just, I don't, I just don't get that. I'm sorry.
Okay, because here's what he's saying. It's like, maybe it was the ball valve ball. Maybe that's all it was. That's probably the most likely industrial item. And if it was, then you have to have misinterpreted the rolling action. And he goes on to say, like, well, that doesn't surprise me. All these stories I cover, it seems like everybody's misinterpreting strange actions and attributing it to something paranormal or weird.
I would totally agree with that in the case of something that happened once.
Right.
Oh, you know what? We put it down on the floor in here in the living room and it made a big arc and it came back around to, the reporter
Yeah.
who was incredulous, in fact, was practically rolling his eyes when he came to the door at Jerry Betz and just literally like, I can't believe I'm here. He went in and it did it for him too. So is he misinterpreting? It's happening over and over and over again. It's not the one thing you saw that you can't really explain that you're trying to put an out of this world explanation on when it turns out to be really mundane. Because sure, that happens.
Again,
but not over and over and over with dozens of people and entire organizations. It's an oversimplification of the analysis.
Yeah, even going off of what Derling Jones said himself. And again, his quote from the paper was, "The ones I got were slightly out of round." To me, that means maybe visibly. And that might cause a weird rolling action. But that wasn't the case with the Betz sphere. It
had to be out of round and unbalanced.
Yeah, and on
and
an
then if
uneven
it
surface.
was,
Right.
it would roll a little bit till it got to its balancing point and stop.
Yeah. The other thing that he said is that these are extremely rare. He said if the guy who in Florida doesn't want the sphere, I'll certainly take it back. I'll give him, I think he joked and said, I give him $5 for it, because he said these things are not easy to come by. You just don't go downtown and go buy one.
The other thing, and I'll come back to this again, and we just got a picture today from the Betz family member that we had on the show. We just got a picture of the land that it's not the exact spot where it was found, but it's, according to the family, it's virtually identical. I haven't even shown you this picture yet. When you look at it, you're trying to figure out how there's a fire break and you're having to hike a long ways into the woods to get to where it was.
Right.
I mean, this is 20 miles outside of Jacksonville.
Yes, and I know it gets
where
windy
Derling
there.
Jones supposedly was. How does the ball get off the roof of the van, across a fire break, through the woods, over stumps? I mean, it's absurd. It's all, to me, it's crazier than the explanation that it came from space.
Yeah.
That's what I say.
Speaking of which, that's our next topic section here. Other weird balls that fell from space. All right. Well, the Betz sphere isn't the only strange round object that's been found by people and they didn't know what it was or could explain it. This has happened before, but these things usually fall out of the sky, as in the case of the Namibia space ball.
Oh, yeah. By the way,
it's a popular one.
A lot of people have been sending that one to us the past couple of weeks.
Yes. Yeah. No, we've been seeing a lot of it. Well, this is pretty well documented to a degree. This was reported on space.com. The article was dated December 22nd, 2011. Mid-November 2011, a mysterious space ball crashes in Namibia. This metallic ball measured 14 inches wide, or 35 centimeters, and it hit the ground approximately 480 miles, or 750 kilometers, north of Windhoek, the African country's capital. Well, it left a crater 13 inches deep, 33 centimeters, and 12 and a half feet wide, or 3.8 meters across. That's an important point. When something falls from that great of height, space, it leaves a crater.
Yes.
It leaves a big mark on the ground, which the Betz sphere did not. It was just sitting there in the grass.
Yeah. Rob said something when we talked to him earlier in tonight's episode. One of the things that he mentioned was how he couldn't figure out why Hynek was even checking this thing out, because there's nothing about it says it's a UFO.
Right.
There was no crater.
Maybe it landed, though.
To him, though, and I can see Rob's point, this is not a UFO. This is an unusual object. It's a found object, and it behaves weird. But we don't know if it has anything to do with space at all in any way, necessarily. Even though there's some conjecture on the part of the family and others who talk about some marks on it that appear consistent with something that might have traveled in space. But that's kind of,
that's a really interesting point. The brownish rust color looking nicks may have cosmic material.
Yeah.
Crap you find in the Van Allen belt, that kind of stuff.
Right.
That was triggering his thoughts, perhaps, that this thing had been to space and somehow came down. And then how did it get to a soft landing?
Yeah.
Did it guide itself down? But no one has ever said this thing levitated.
That's right.
Which is interesting. I mean, if it did, that's a whole other ballgame, really.
Ooh. Nice pun. Was that a
pun?
there
you go. Yes.
Yeah.
Unintentional, I swear.
Yeah.
Well, what do the authorities think of the one in Namibia?
Well, the thing about the one in Namibia is you can look it up on Google, and in about 30 seconds or less, you come back, you find out it's not shiny. It has two nipples on the end of it. It's probably another fuel tank of some kind.
Yes.
And it's titanium. It wasn't stainless steel. Nothing about it really matches the Betz sphere.
No.
Other than that, it's round.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing. The nipples on the end, which you can see clearly in one of the photos, I think either was something where it was held in place in the larger piece of machinery, or the inlet and outlet valve. And that fits more of Brian Dunning's theory about hydrazine tanks.
Yes.
But again, those have obvious couplings.
Exactly.
Yeah, not a fuel tank of any kind.
Right. Fuel's not much good if you can't get it in or out of the container.
Right. Well, exactly. But you know what? A lot of space junk does crash to Earth, and has for quite a while since we've had satellites. And big stuff. The Upper Atmosphere Research Satellite, UARS, 6.5 tons. That was a craft that monitored climate from 91 to 2005. That went into the Pacific Ocean. But other spheres like that have been found in Australia, Central America, over the last 2 decades. And people find them, and then they report to the authorities. The weird thing about the Namibia ball was that I couldn't really find anything. I didn't look that hard, but I couldn't find anything that was conclusively a statement by any authority saying, oh, it's ours, this is what the deal is.
Yeah.
But obviously, yes, it fell to Earth from space.
Yeah. So in 2007, there was a severely damaged sphere found in Australia. November that same year, 2007, also 3 balls fell from the sky in Spain.
Yep.
And then in 2008, there was another one found in Brazil. There's video of that one online.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's got a little more shine to it. It's cosmetically, it's more appealing.
Sure.
But once again, it's also a lot bigger.
Yeah.
And clearly lighter for its size. It's pretty big. And it also has the couplings on it, as you would talk about.
South Vietnam, there was one in 2016 in January. The military investigated 3 mysterious balls that just showed up in the country's north, the rural part of that country. 2 metal balls were discovered in Yanbai province in 2016 of January. And then a larger 3rd ball landed in a cornfield. Here's another aspect of it. Not necessarily saying the Betz sphere would have done this, but maybe if somebody was around. In Yanbai, the locals said they heard a large explosion or large sound noises. Those were heard first, and then the metal balls fell from the sky. So breaking the sound barrier?
Yeah, maybe.
Re-entry?
If something's re-entering and then also it exploded on re-entry.
Yeah.
And then the parts came down.
Exactly. So there you go. I think
none of these have anything in common with the Betz sphere other than the fact that they're round. That they're spherical.
Yeah.
And they're not even perfectly spherical, so they don't even have that in common.
For some people, Scott, that's enough.
Yeah.
Well, talk about something that's not round, but here's an interesting story that we may even do a full episode on in and of itself.
I had not heard of this until we did this show, and I got to tell you, it has caught my eye.
You're not the only one, because it is so strange. But the reason is, I think you may not have heard of it, or most Western audiences had not heard of this, is because this story comes from Japan.
Yes.
Kira.
The Kira object.
Exactly. Well, some people call it the Kira UFO.
It did fly. This one flew.
This one flew. Not really well. It was described as flying like a bat, kind of zigzagging back and forth, but it flew. It levitated. But the idea here, and the connection that's possibly being made to the Betz sphere, is that it also seemed to have self-preservation motivations and actions.
Yeah.
That it didn't like you messing with it.
Yeah.
And it made corrective actions to try and get away from you.
Well, yeah, and now we got to nod to Rob Morphy on this.
Yeah.
He's the one that brought this one to our attention while we were researching the Betz sphere, and this is part of one of his blog entries at Mysterious Universe.
Yeah.
Another podcast, which you should check out if you haven't.
Oh, yeah.
Similar to us, but Australian. This is a fascinating story, and this also happened in the 70s. This was August 1972. It was actually took place the day before my 3rd birthday.
Wow. Well, probably why you didn't remember it.
Yeah, I don't remember it.
Yeah.
In the Kira suburb of Kochi City.
Yes.
Which is the capital of the Kochi Prefecture on the Shikoku Island of Japan.
Yeah. What I love about this one is that it's really well documented, actually, for an object.
Yeah.
So get a load of this. 13-year-old Michio Seo, he was coming home from middle school one day. He was riding by a rice paddy, and he saw a strange-looking metallic object floating a few feet above the rice paddy. It's
above a rice paddy.
Yes, levitating. That will catch your eye and attention. So he sees this thing kind of hovering in the field, and what it looks like is it's a dull silver color, and it's in the shape of a hat.
Yeah, it looks like a little hat, or almost a bell.
A bell, yes, a bell shape with a wide brim on it, and instead of the perfectly rounded top, it's got a flat top on it.
Yeah.
And underneath it, it gets more interesting because the way it's described is that, well, actually, there's pictures. You can look at it for yourself.
Good pictures.
Yeah. He didn't know all this to begin with. This thing's kind of hovering in the field. And as he approaches it, it projects a blinding light at him.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this causes him to freak out. I think a lot of us would. He runs straight home. This is almost like a Spielberg movie here.
Yeah.
Where he gets his friends together. Around 7 p.m., they go back, and he convinces, we got to check this thing out, man. So they go back. They don't believe him, but this might be kind of fun. So they all go back, and guess what? It's there about 60 feet away from them in the same field. And as the sun was going down, they said it started emitting a pulsing, multicolored light. Okay, so right now, here's 2 things that are different, of course, than the sphere. This thing is, for whatever reason, is emitting light and flying about, and as it was approached, you don't know what the pulsing light was, but it sounds like, get away from me.
Yeah. When you look at it, you can't see anything on it that would explain where the light's coming from. It doesn't have lights on it.
That is an interesting point. It does not have any lenses on it. It's solid. You don't know why it's glowing, but they were claiming that this thing was giving off light. And here's another thing. So then as one of the boys approaches, this thing stops. That was the other thing too. So it knows you're approaching because Michio, when he first approached, it stopped in midair. It stopped zigzagging around. The second time here when the boy approaches, it also stops. But this time, as he approaches, it lets out a loud pop or very loud clicking sound, and it began to shimmer with a bluish color. That's freaky because, again, it's not like this thing is a light, with the plastic lens. You can see a bulb inside. There's no openings on the top of it. How is it emitting light and color? They eventually managed to capture this thing.
By the way, Rob has a great article on this on his own blog, Cryptopia.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have a link to that too.
Right. They get up close to it. They take a flash picture of it, and it senses the flash, and it emits one of its own, brighter than the flash bulb. And then it spins to the ground. And that's when one of the boys picks it up, and there's a picture of him holding it.
I love that picture.
That's pretty brave, yeah. Would you go pick it up, or what would you do?
Not at the age I'm at now. As a child, maybe.
When you had less sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he said it felt like something was moving inside. Now, that is similar to the Betz sphere.
Right. And that also describes gyroscopic action. If you've ever had a spinning gyroscope in your hand and you move your hand around, you know how that feels.
Right.
That's what I think of when I think about these people talking about feeling movement inside.
Yeah. Well, that's what they felt. Especially if you shook it, as Jerry said. And again,
why are we always shaking things?
Well, it's like a Christmas
Let's
present.
shake the thing we don't understand.
Well, they did more than that with this thing.
When you look at these pictures, it's pretty amazing. It looks like with that picture of Hiroshi holding it in the field, there's some close-up ones that they took once they got it home. And you really get a good view of it. These are pretty easy to find on the internet if you just know what to look for. And it's Kera, Kera.
Mm-hmm.
But the really curious part of the object is the bottom, where the edge or the brim portion of the underside of the hat looks like an LP record. It has
it
grooves.
does. Yeah,
it has big grooves in it.
Right.
Not spiral grooves. They're concentric, but
Yeah.
it does have grooves. Although some of them don't go all the way around. There's breaks in them. And then the center of the bottom has a square panel with 31 small holes that radiate out from the center. Much like an old speaker cover, or for the old folks, the mouthpiece, the mouthpiece holes on an old telephone.
Yeah, remember those?
Yeah, that is exactly what it looks like. Now, around these vent or exhaust holes are some really peculiar and fascinating etchings. The pictures are so crazy, you can't really figure out what they are. Although the center bottom disc is round on what could be the bottom portion of the inner circle, there appear to be an etching of half circles laid out in a brickwork pattern.
Mm-hmm.
The half circles have concentric lines in a pattern that resembles waves or clouds. One or two symbols, where one might be a flying object or bird shape.
Yeah, it's kind of bulbous bird.
Yeah, bulbous bird. And then the other symbol connected to what looks like a closed flower or leaf, or something like a closed tulip.
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me. You can't tell what it is, but why is this thing decorated?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not that crazy because obviously this thing flies. And look, we decorate our own aircraft.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. It has no easily identifiable method of propulsion either. It doesn't have wings. It's not aerodynamically shaped. It doesn't have rotors. It doesn't have anything.
Well,
but somehow it's levitating.
Yeah, and so if you're thinking, though, that this thing is a hoax, that some dude, a Japanese inventor is making a toy and he's freaking these kids out and creating buzz, it's not like a drone here that we have common nowadays. There's no propellers. It doesn't emit exhaust. Well, it might. You can't see it. You know what I'm saying? But it's not forcing air down to create lift. They don't know how it flies. So it wasn't just the boys, though, if you want an adult to weigh in. The boys took it to one of their friends, Yasuo Fujimoto, and Yasuo's father witnessed it. He looked at it briefly. His name is Mutsuo, but he was the director for the Center for Science Education in Kochi City. So he knows a little bit about science.
Yeah.
He dismissed it kind of initially, and he always regretted that later because I believe that he saw it in action later.
Right.
And he's like, man, I should have looked at that closer. But, like kids pick up weird crap all the time and bring it home.
Right.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
They looked inside those holes on the bottom and they saw what they described as like the insides of a radio, like circuitry, miniature levers, some kind of machine parts and circuitry. Something inside was operating this thing, making it fly. So you can look at the Betz sphere and say, well, all right, it didn't fly, but if you believe the testimony, this thing rolled and had actions on its own and seemed to be able to detect things in its environment. Drop-offs, distances, the person that rolled it first. Remember they always said it came back to you?
Yeah.
It often did, and that freaked people out. It would make a big arc come back to Lou. There's nothing inside the sphere that is like that. There's no circuits, no wires. We don't know what those tiny spherules did, but whatever it is, to me, that means it's a lot more elegant. Okay, so the Kira object, though, as crazy as this thing sounds, it's documented, it's there. They would go on to lose this thing because it would disappear from their house. They'd find it again a couple days later.
Over by the rice paddy.
It came back to the same field, and so they weren't real concerned because weirdly, it just disappeared from out of the house. They'd wait, the next day it was just gone. Finally, when they dumped water into it, which it's just funny how young boys that kind of figure this out, or to them it makes sense. They figured this thing never was around when it was raining. So they captured it with a bucket of water and some wet towels. And they kept it finally in a big plastic bag that was filled with water. That's how they were transporting it. Of course, once they did, it did some very strange thing. It started glowing inside once they poured the water inside. And it killed it. So that's another connection I want to make.
Yeah.
They did something that seemed to make it inert.
Right.
Which was to pour water into it.
Yeah.
And it made this really loud, they said it was like buzzing like a cicada.
Right.
It's like, don't, you don't pour water into electronics.
Right.
But like the sphere, the Betz sphere, something happened to it which altered it. In this case, it was the water. In the Betz sphere, who knows what the Navy did to it.
Right.
Now, the case with the Kira object is that they were finally transporting it, I believe, on their bikes. And this is so Super 8 and Spielberg-esque. They had it bound up in a duffel bag inside this plastic bag that was knotted, filled with water. And one of the boys felt he had a string tied to his wrist and tied to the bag, just in case it fell off the bike or it was in one of the baskets. But they also, I believe, had rope around this duffel bag. So they didn't want this thing getting away. Well, as they're transporting this thing, the boy felt a real strong tug on his wrist. They all stopped. They looked in the bag. It disappeared. It vanished out of the bag.
Right.
If you believe them.
Yeah.
So this thing is half dead. It's like, I must return to my home planet. But was there a little guy inside who didn't like water?
Right.
It's like, there was a goo inside. It's just the craziest thing. But in relation to the sphere, the Kira thing is more like a UFO. It did more things. It traveled, it made noise, it did a lot of other characteristic UFO things.
Including flying.
But the sphere is, I think if it did all that stuff and people still had it, that's a game changer. You know what I'm saying? The Betz sphere is just mysterious enough in that it does a few things that it should not. But it doesn't do so many things that it's freaking everybody out in the world.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's just mysterious enough. Let's quickly go through then all the other hypotheses about what the sphere might be. And we've already talked about some of these, but these are the most popular ones. So large ball bearing. What do you think of that?
Do they move by themselves?
Not that I know of.
Okay, no. I'm going to go with no.
Unless they're in a maze or a groove thing.
Right.
Paper mill ball valve. I think we've pretty much said
Does
enough
it move
about
by
that.
itself?
Yeah. Right.
No.
James Durling Jones's art project balls.
Do they move by themselves?
We don't know, but he never produced one that he said did.
No,
he never
I don't think so.
claimed that they did anyway.
Yeah.
And there's for all those various reasons we mentioned previously.
Can you imagine the Inquirer blue ribbon panel being assembled to look at an art ball? That doesn't seem likely. U.S. Navy? I don't know.
Yeah,
Doesn't
I
seem
don't.
likely.
No, because I could see the Inquirer not wanting to pay the $50,000 to
Yeah.
say like that's an art ball. Well, here's another one. We talked about this before as well. The Dewar Flask, or some kind of cryogenic storage device for liquid. It would seem to make sense, but again, this thing has no in or out. You can't get fluid into it. You can't get anything out.
What is the point of storing the fluid
Right.
if you can't get it in or out?
Now, here's an interesting one I believe that people have been talking about on Twitter. Maybe we've gotten an email or two about, is that they notice that in industrial crushers, they have balls in them, some of them, and that's called a ball mill.
Uh-huh.
And this thing might be a ball mill ball.
Do they move by themselves?
With the aid of a hopper, yes.
Yeah, okay.
They bounce around crushing rocks. Now, the problem is I looked this up. The ball mill balls seem to be smaller in size generally. Maybe they're big ones. I didn't really find any. I mean, I looked at a bunch of industrial videos. One guy demonstrated one. It's kind of cool. They're in a hopper, and what they do is they crush material. So you have different size balls. You can have smaller ones that are about the size of a softball, maybe up to half of a bowling ball size, but nothing as big as I saw that's 8 inches in diameter.
Right.
At that point in the stage of refining, you're trying to get it down to a fine grit, and then you can get your particulate material down to a really fine grit if you want. You just keep changing the size of the balls.
Mm-hmm.
But those are cast, it seems. Solid, because you want the heavy weight. Remember James Durling Jones's 10-inch balls were 70 pounds?
Yeah.
And solid.
Yeah.
The 8-inch ones were hollow. So, yeah, it didn't seem to fit. But good guess. Here's another one that's right up your alley because you love submarines.
I do like submarines.
Let us know about this one.
Right. So this is a theory that there are markers on the bottom of the ocean for submarines that give them a well-defined point, like a fixed point that they can use to navigate or for targeting and that sort of thing. It's not clear to me whether that's a known thing that definitely exists or whether people were conjecturing that maybe it's a classified thing that exists.
It would be a classified thing. That's what I read.
So in that case, it's really just a guess.
It's a guess because
here's a steel ball. I'm going to develop a whole idea for submarine positioning based around this ball that was found in a field.
Yeah.
That seems a little bit like what this is. But a lot of investigators seem to think that this was a possibility, that it was a marine marker for submarines. Which,
well, that does fit in with the navigation idea.
Yeah.
The problem with this one is that the Navy looked at it. You'd think that they would know.
They would have claimed it.
Right.
There's another problem in that if it's supposed to be a marker for you that gives you the definitive point, then you don't want it moving around by itself. I'm going to keep coming back to that because that defeats the whole purpose of being a marker.
Exactly. Even if it's on the bottom of the ocean floor bumping into crabs.
Yeah.
And, sea
it's no good.
cucumbers.
It's no good.
Well, I mean, part of that idea that fueled that is that Williston said that there was radio signals coming off of this thing, or it's generating some kind of radio frequency.
Yeah.
So that ties in with people's theory about this. Also, the fact that, well, if you say, why did the Navy know? It's like, well, this is so top secret. Maybe the underlings didn't know. And by that time, word did not reach the top. But my thing is I go back to, this looks like Navy. It's ours. We're going to need this back. Like, and Jerry's like, fine.
Yeah.
Fine, take it back.
Right.
No one ever did that.
Yeah.
Until later, it's like, hey, can we look at this? Like, no, you can't look at it now. You had your chance.
Right.
Get out of here. Yeah, that kind of kiboshes that idea for me. All right, now here's an interesting idea proposed by one of our ARC members, Falk, who wondered if this thing could be some type of advanced experimental projectile. In this case, for a railgun. You know what those are?
You know, I've been hearing about them for years, but I didn't really know what they were until they turned up in this outline and I looked them up.
Well, a railgun is an electromagnetic gun, and it's designed to fire a projectile made out of magnetic alloy at very high velocity.
Right. Don't they have like some insanely long range as well?
Yes, and they require a tremendous amount of power to operate. But with, nuclear power being available, it's a possibility. What I'm wondering here is that if this thing moved around on its own, was it some type of projectile that corrected itself in flight?
Right.
You're talking about effective ranges of many miles for this projectile to be able to hit its target and accurately. So it's a very interesting experiment. Not new. Did you know that the first electromagnetic gun was the coil gun, and that was developed in 1845?
No, I did not.
And the first electric guns were really created before 1920. And in 1950, there was a test bed built in Australia, and the same thing in the 70s. So possibly, I don't know how it would get there other than there are naval air stations nearby. I know the Navy has been experimenting with some of that. So like we said, though, a lot of testing has been done, especially imagine around World War II. And of course, the Germans were into this because the idea sounded great and they were running out of ideas to turn the tide of the war. In 1944, during World War II, Joachim Hansler of Germany's Ordnance Office proposed the first theoretically viable railgun. This is from the wiki entry on it. It was never built, but plans were made that they discovered that this thing could be built. It was theoretically feasible. So an order was put in to be built, but they never got around to it. The other thing about this thing, to make it work as what they wanted for anti-aircraft guns, you would need enough power to illuminate half of Chicago.
Yeah.
So it's not real practical.
Right.
Unless you have a Nazi bell. Ooh. And then you go, well, talking about the Nazi bell, you're going to now talk about another possibility for the sphere, and that is...
Yeah, the Foo Fighter, which we brought up, and some people thought that the sphere itself might be a Foo Fighter. It's not the band, but the band is named for these.
That's true.
Foo Fighters were a World War II phenomenon reported by pilots of Allied aircraft. They were seen in the skies from 1944 onward and were named by the pilots of the U.S. 415th Night Fighter Squadron. Now, these things defied the current state of technology. They were described as looking like Christmas tree lights or balls of fire that would fly around erratically, keeping up with aircraft and making wild turns. Additionally, they simply vanished as well. They would be out there and then they would just be gone. And the pilots mostly apparently thought that they were enemy technology. But here's the crazy thing. They never behaved in a hostile manner.
That's right.
They kept pace, they flew all around, but they never attacked. And pointedly, they could not be outmaneuvered, nor could they be shot down. They were too sophisticated. Now, both German and Japanese pilots had seen them. So if you believe these might have been some kind of alien technology, apparently it was there to observe warfare with no attempt to interfere, and to do so by using far superior technology.
Wow, you know what I just flashed on?
What?
Flight 19 and what some of our remote viewers had said happened during that, that they were being observed.
Yeah.
Not being interfered with, but observing the process happen.
Now, the Robertson panel eventually convened on the Foo Fighter reports, and you can look them up if you want to know who they are. I'm not going to get into that here, but here's a quote from the Wikipedia page about that. They noted that their behavior did not appear to be threatening and mentioned possible explanations. For instance, that they were electrostatic phenomena similar to St. Elmo's fire, electromagnetic phenomena, or simply reflections of light from ice crystals. The panel's report suggested that if the term flying saucers had been popular in 1943 through 45, these objects would have been so labeled. So again, this is over 20 years prior to when the Betz sphere was found. But that's the thing. I mean, Foo Fighters, that's the other thing. They were described as glowing balls of fire, Christmas tree lights. The Betz sphere did not emit any kind of light. It also didn't seem capable of it, although the Kira object didn't seem capable of it either, and it did.
Yeah, that's true.
But the only thing that might connect the Betz sphere to the idea of a Foo Fighter, for me anyway, might be its size and its ability to self-navigate.
That's right, yeah.
But that begs the larger question, could the Betz sphere be just the navigational component of a larger, more complex craft of some kind? either much larger or maybe only a little larger. Maybe the sphere is a core of something like that, something that was damaged or lost, and it's the only surviving piece due to its strong design. I don't know.
Well, you just explained my entire ending
Hypothesis?
theory. Yeah, so thanks for that. Well, I don't have to know, but
We're almost there. anyway.
yeah. Well, here's the most way out and our final most popular theory series here in the list. Alien atomic device, or alien doomsday device, or alien weapon, or just a warhead, which is actually, that's not that way out there. That's kind of what some of these scientist types were thinking, right? Hynek
Yeah.
possibly believed it was a component of a warhead or a dummy piece.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now that comes to my theory.
Well, it keeps coming up because
Yeah.
it's a deactivated warhead or a component within it. But that's not the way out part, I guess. The way out end of that is that it's ancient alien tech. And I'm not sure why that connection was being made, other than people love ancient aliens. People love to hate the ancient aliens ideas.
It's polarizing.
Yes, very polarizing. But the way that things are described in the Mahabharata, the Indian ancient tome quoted by Oppenheimer, is that there are devices, somehow weapons used in an ancient battle. I'm very generally summarizing here, but they describe something that sounds like a nuclear war. Brilliant flash of light in the sky, people melting, all that kind of stuff. Horrible, horrible things. Flying ships called vimanas. People somehow made a connection to this sphere. Maybe it's something to do with ancient alien technology, but as kind of a weapon. I don't know where you would get that. However, as Scott was going over the manuscript from earlier in the show, that author, the journalist, the space journalist, made a reference to some kind of ancient weapon, right?
Yeah, he did mention that in the document.
I think just kind of fancifully
Well,
wondering.
it sounded to me like that was an emerging school of thought at the time when he wrote it, and
Yeah.
he seemed to be very enamored with those ideas and
Yeah.
those possibilities.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the popular theories we have. I can't imagine any combination of those in any way else, but those are the ones that keep resurfacing.
Okay, so wrapping up the show, we're going to touch on a few final things, and there were some questions that we actually sent to the Betz family and had them answer, and other questions that we were able to answer ourselves based on the research in the prior episodes. One of the big ones we're going to talk about, of course, is where is the sphere now, which is something that keeps coming up. Everybody on social media is like, did I miss it? Have you said where the sphere was? No, we haven't said that. So we had to look at the big picture here. You know, the Betz family, they had intentionally chosen Fort George Island for its isolation. And then this thing came into their lives. And I don't think they could have possibly conceived of everything that unfolded with it. They sent us some correspondence, some copies of correspondence they've been getting. Some of those letters were dated in the early mid-90s. That means they were dealing with this thing for 20 years.
Wow.
Just feedback and people still trying to figure it out and look at it and that sort of thing. So here's a quote that was in the Palm Beach Post in April 14th, 1974. We actually got this from one of Rob Morphy's blog entries. We came to Fort George Island to get away to a serene atmosphere. Now I can't get away from the telephone. It means nothing to people in the West that it's midnight here. And when they quit calling, those on the East wake up and start. So that gives you an idea of how frenzied and frenetic it was. We've talked about that throughout this series. So what are the last things we know about the sphere and how it performed after it went through the barrage of tests and experiments, some of which we have no idea what happened to it? It's still magnetic. We know that for sure. But it no longer moves under its own power and hasn't since the Blue Ribbon panel. And by X-ray, it appears now to be altered in comparison to the initial X-rays that were taken of it by the U.S. Navy at Cecil Field, which we ourselves published a picture of one of those. We don't know if there's more than one, but the one that we have, we published that with tonight's show at astonishinglegends.com/X-ray. So the secondary set of X-rays, according to Jerry Betz, she burned them. She was concerned about the proof that she knew and her family knew that it had been altered and that might put her or her family in danger.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that the sphere, for all intents and purposes, was dead. All it would do is be a magnet, which you can get at the hardware store. So that's kind of a bummer, honestly. And how it came to get that way, we'll never know.
Mm-hmm.
Where are the Betzes now? My answer to that is here and there. That's as far as I'm going on that.
Okay.
Here's another question that I put to them, written question that we got the answer from. Can we get a more precise location on where it was found? We touched on this earlier, but I'm going to get more specific here. It was on land near Fay and Alta Road. There's more access to the area now, but in 1974, there were not highways anywhere near it. It was a place of scrub oak, pine trees, palmettos, and snakes. Lots of snakes.
I'll bet. Yeah.
I said this a minute ago, but I'm going to reiterate. We just received a picture today of some land that the family says it's not the exact spot where they found the sphere. It is virtually identical to where it was found. So you have to take a look at this picture and try to understand the environment that the sphere was found in. I also asked them, what do you think the relationship, if any, may have been between the sphere and the fire or the storm damage that was close by? The answer was, the fires had been happening for a while all over North Florida due to the dryness of the area. We never really felt as though the two were connected. Do you think the danger associated with the sphere has passed? I think the danger from our own government has passed, but we're still nervous about the lunatic fringe that came out of the woodwork. Do you think they got what they wanted out of it? So that's why you were left alone by at least the U.S. government. I don't know if they got what they wanted. In retrospect, I feel like they viewed us as an annoyance and something in their way, in quotes. I believe that having the press get involved early on may have bought us some time with the ball that we may not have had if we had made contact with the military or government first. And now, Dr. Hynek. And one of the questions we asked was, do you think that he was being deceptive? Our interview subject says, we do. Jerry felt that he had his sights set on getting the sphere before he ever met us. We felt that he gleaned information from us and fed it to us in order to ingratiate himself to us. I think he got to know us so he could plan a path of least resistance to get the sphere.
In light of our interview guest, their comments from the start of the show here in part 4 was that I think they wanted to make it clear that they didn't feel he was sinister, but obviously he had designs, which he worked in there because he was genuinely interested in this object. And he sounds like a sinister or government agent, but it's not what they want to relay. It's that, yeah, he wasn't being totally truthful to us. But on the other hand, there was something there that was genuine about the object they had because he did have plans on it. And he wasn't totally upfront about it. You know, he did apologize to Jerry saying, well, I should have told you. This thing to me is interesting. I want to study it. So obviously he had angled his way in there, and the sense that I get was whatever was going to happen with the sphere, whatever experiments, whatever its fate, he wanted to be there.
And now for the last two and the biggest questions. Where is it now? And this is the answer from the Betz family to that question. It is no longer in the possession of the Betz family, but was transferred to a third party for safekeeping. Next question we asked after that, will it ever be shown to the world again? While we're not opposed to it, we have finally achieved normalcy in our lives after the years of harassment and concerns for the well-being of our family. If it were put back out there, it would have to be something facilitated by the previously mentioned third party. So when it comes down to my conclusions anyway, they all got derailed by the X-ray, which
Really?
we didn't get until late in the process.
Yeah, that's true.
What I thought it was, and it's funny because our interview guest said, well, I hope you end this show, you're going to tell us what it is. And I wish I could do that for them. It's a question that is still bothering them as much today as it did when they found it. They still want to know what it was.
We all do.
I thought that it was most likely a sophisticated inertial navigation system.
That's right. It's a pretty good guess, I think.
Right. Inertial navigation systems go by lots of different names, but what they are man-made. That's a terrestrial system that uses gyroscopes and in most cases, computers as well, to determine where an object is based on knowing the origin point of the object's departure from wherever it goes from. It knows that, and then all the movements that it makes from that point forward, it's able to tell you where it is through a relationship to motions that it goes through after it departs its point of origin.
Yeah, accelerometers,
gyroscopes, all that kind of stuff. And anybody who's held a gyroscope in their hand knows that feeling, which I said a few minutes ago. That is what I thought this thing was. I thought it had gyroscopes inside of it. I know that the SR-71, for example, had an inertial navigation system like this.
Yeah.
It looked like a sphere on the outside, but inside it's packed with complex electronics and mechanics.
Right.
And the X-ray shows clearly that none of that is inside this thing.
Yeah.
Next question. Could it be a dummy warhead?
Yeah.
Was it a placeholder warhead? And here's something that's really interesting. I'm looking again at the cover of the manuscript that the family sent. Our interview guest pointed out to me that Charles Calvin Thomas, also known as Tip Thomas, was a relative in the family. He was the head of General Electric's Atomic Division in Schenectady, New York. He came down and personally looked at it while the family had it. He's a family member, obviously a pretty smart one. And he thought it might be a dummy warhead for a MIRV missile.
Dang.
MIRV stands for Multiple Something Reentry Vehicle. And that's what the warheads, I think they can spread out. The missile brings them pretty close to where they need to go, and then they can take their own courses.
That's why they're hard to knock out. That's the purpose.
So that's what he thought it was. But it's not clear to me whether he ever saw it move around on its own or do any of that other stuff. But just based on appearances, the head of the GE Atomic Division said, well, if I had to guess, it's a dummy warhead. I thought that was a possibility. I don't know what a dummy warhead looks like on the inside.
Right.
So I would say yes, except for the part about it moving around by itself.
Yeah.
That rules everything out when you come back to that. And the X-rays too, again, I've never seen an X-ray of a dummy warhead, but I did find warheads and other things online in my research that were polished steel spheres. There's one in particular that was thought to be an Israeli weapon, but then they thought it was a hoax. There's a whole story behind it. It's called the Vanunu sphere, VUNUNU. We'll post it with our show links, but I don't know. Then the other thing that affects my conclusions is the fact that we have ascertained that the fluctuating magnetic field that it demonstrated, which had either 3 or 4 poles, depending on who you believe, but that the density of that fluctuating field, that should come from a powered source, and it doesn't have power that we know of. So how is it getting power for that field to fluctuate? And especially when you look at the X-rays, you don't see any kind of power mechanism. You just see through tiny little balls. So what's going on there?
Right.
As I said, Rob had said categorically it wasn't a UFO. He couldn't figure out why Hynek was interested in it. Still a question that I have, if it's not even necessarily astronomical. Up until the X-rays, I would have said, this is some top secret classified future navigation system. It moves around on its own because that's what it's designed to do, is kind of figure out where it is and how to get places. And that maybe it belonged in the heart of another more complex system in a spy plane or a missile or something like that. After seeing the X-ray, I've come around to thinking that it is sophisticated extraterrestrial technology that was rendered inert by various experiments. I'm done. Sorry.
Do not drop the mic, please.
Sorry, Betz family.
Oh.
You got anything you want to add?
Well, as we've gone along this entire journey, which was much longer than we anticipated, but a really fruitful and interesting one, my thoughts have not changed that much, but they're informed by different things because, again, you have to go with the premise that this thing did move on its own. And then if you buy into that, you take all the statements as being accurate. It exhibited various but defined actions. And if you look at that, the logic is that it could define and determine spatial relationships. It knew where the edge of a table was. It may not have known how far down the fall was because it can't see, but it knew to stop. It could sense certain things. Maybe it knew how far down to the ground it was, but just chose not to. It knew where the center of the table was, it seemed. It knew if it was on an incline and tried to go up it. So you could glean from that, it had self-preservation motivations and sensibilities. It wanted to take itself somewhere. And people were wondering, like, why is he talking about a Mexican jumping bean? I don't care. It doesn't make any sense. Other than that, Jerry described it like that. And she was just describing it kind of hopping around as a little kind of a toy. Well, it's a moth larva and a bean and a seed that was popular in our era. But it has a similar principle in that the larva can't see, it can't smell, it doesn't have legs, it can sense heat, that one sensation. And what can it do? It can wriggle and jiggle these filaments inside to get itself out of the sun. Mexico gets very hot. Maybe it's right under a bush, and all it has to do is get itself a few inches to get underneath a leaf or something, because that's a self-preservation thing. If it stays in the sun, it's going to die. The sphere seemed to have some kind of sensibilities that it knew where it would rather be, and it reacted. And if you look at, the biggest thing it did was roll around. It did other things, weird things. It vibrated. It played back tones. There was something about energy and vibration that was part of its makeup. But the one thing that was most noticeable is that it rolled around. Now, a lot of people have said that this thing was broken. They sensed it like maybe it wasn't functioning right. It didn't do all the things it could have done. Maybe it did fly. But if you think about the sphere rolling, that's all it does. It's like, well, that's not much of an action. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make any sense that it completes itself to just roll a few feet and stop. was the point of that? Except if this thing were a part of a larger machine. And if it was held in place, then I wonder about the inertia inside, the thing that gets it to roll. In other words, whatever that was inside that got this thing to roll, if maybe it wasn't the rolling around on its own, that was the point of this thing, unless it was contained in something that could sense that. And then the actions made sense within this larger machine.
Sure.
What if it was held in place, but whatever got it to roll, that action inside, that energy was the point. It was somehow a kind of a guidance system or a sensing device that's limited, but it has extraordinary properties. Because, yeah, obviously the thing wasn't made to just roll around, I think, because, and I told this, Scott, this is my big theory about if there is alien technology, it was highly advanced, and you have people from another extra-dimensional intelligence, extraterrestrial intelligence, that theory that they're so far advanced, maybe there's a psychic component to it, as well as a mechanical energies that we don't even comprehend, then something that they would devise, the more elegant option is not to have more gears and crap and wires on the inside of this thing to make it work. It's to have the most simple, elegant solution on the inside. And what we've been able to see on the inside are 3 tiny little balls. One, maybe it's burst. Maybe that's what's broken about it, and it doesn't function fully. Or maybe that's supposed to be that way. But there are different densities. There are 3 little balls, and that's it. And whatever combination of stuff on the inside, whatever that's made of, stuff we may not even know about yet, our science, got that thing to roll. That's mind-blowing. So considering all that at the end of this, my guess is I don't know if it's, alien or human technology. If it's human, it is so far advanced that it's next level quantum leap technology, I think. And it's possible, but it would be really, really advanced and very, very secret, I would imagine. If it's alien technology, to them it might be as simple as a gyroscope that they understand. So in conclusion, I won't say that it's alien technology, I just don't know, but it is otherworldly.
All right, folks, before we wrap up this series, we did ask the Betz family if Jerry Betz herself would like to issue a statement regarding the Betz sphere and this story. And that's where we're going to leave you tonight, with the statement which was written and sent in to us. So I'm going to read that to you now. The sphere was an interesting and intriguing object to have had come into our lives. While it started as a curiosity, and certainly brought some wonderful people into our lives, our desire to understand what it was became overshadowed by the chaos and exhaustion that seemed to be a huge part of the equation. Our privacy and normalcy of life became something we could no longer control, and the safety of our family felt very threatened. That is something that we never want to revisit. While we too are curious about the sphere, what it is, and where it came from, the answer to that is not worth our peace of mind. We have shared everything that we know or have been told over the years, as well as we can remember. I think that it is important for people to understand that any suggestion of a hoax implies that we were either claiming something to be true that was not, or we manipulated the sphere to perform tricks, in quotes. Neither is true. We shared our observations and allowed the sphere to be examined, studied, and tested. The odd behavior which we reported was filmed and documented by outside parties, and the behaviors were substantiated. I guess the best way to sum up our position is to say that we never tried to say what the ball was or is. We just tried to ask what it is. Now we are ready to close this chapter of our lives for good. That's going to wrap up our series on the Betz sphere. We'll be back next week with a new episode.
Please remember to support our sponsors. They help keep the show free and the lights on in Blanket Fortiana.
Special thanks to John Bolin.
Hi, I'm Frederick Steyer.
Hi, I'm Elliot Gates.
Hi, I'm Darren Young.
Hello, I'm Gary Clemenstein. Galaxy-wide in perpetuity.
In perpetuity.
In perpetuity.
Present or future compensation.
Our show is edited by Sarah Voorhees Wendell and co-produced by Tess Feifel, who is also our head of research.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane, and our sound design and additional composing is by Ryan McCullough.
Special thanks to the Astonishing Research Corps.
But most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
You can also support the show at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to additional bonus content. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.